My fellow Westorians, I'm Aziz, with me is Ashea, and this is Valar Rereadis. Each episode of Valar Rereadis for the Winds of Winter will feature a guest or guests. We'll take a closer look at each chapter, going through them one by one instead of in batches of 3 or 4 or 5. A standard warning must apply as well. These chapters are subject to change by the time we see them, but our other standard disclaimer applies as well. The chapters that have already been actually published rather than read aloud at conventions are less likely to change, and this is one of those. This one was fully published rather than just read aloud, so I'd say it's more likely to stay stable without any changes at all, and if there are changes, they'd probably be pretty minor. And with that, our guests to help us break down this most excellent, interesting chapter is our friends, yes, friends, plural, from the Isle of Faces podcast, and you all are used to hearing us mention one person from the Isle of Faces pod, so that's the first thing we'll discuss here. I want you all to tell everybody about this new change, this exciting doubling of your personnel, and what you guys are up to over there.
Hi, hello, good to see everyone again. Good to finally get here. Sorry for already continuing my streak of tech issues. It wouldn't really be a guest appearance by me unless I mess it up somehow. But yeah, here now. And as you said, Aziz, joined by Emily of the Eyrie, who is my new, at least part-time co-host over on the Isle of Faces for all our new episodes and things that we've got going. So yeah, it gives me great pleasure to bring Emily along today.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for asking me to join, both here and the Isle as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys are doing what you're calling scraps and screens, right? As opposed to the Valar Rereadis episodes, which were scraps and scrolls.
That's right. Yeah, well, we're going to get to those. We haven't even started those yet. So we've got scraps and scrolls, obviously. We're still going along with you guys. But we've also started doing our 100 questions on the Winds of Winter series. We've had episode 1. We've got our first 10 questions out of the way. So only 90 left to go. And that's a lot of fun. And then, yes, we will be starting scraps and screens as well and going back through Game of Thrones. So that's pretty exciting for both of us, I think.
Yeah,
I think that's a really
I
think that's a really interesting thing you guys are doing, by the way, the 100 questions, because it'll be a way when the Winds of Winter comes out for you to find all of your predictions kind of in one place. Whereas for us, if we wanted to see what we thought about for Arianne, we have to go to many episodes. We've never said it succinctly.
Yeah, sometimes I forget what my take is.
I honestly think that when the Winds of Winter is announced, I'll use something like, your list of 100 questions, some polls and whatever, and write down my answers for all of that. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we have a glorious spreadsheet going. It's wonderful.
I wonder just how many spreadsheets this fandom has generated. An above average number, I'd say.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is going to be a great episode. We're used to having Isle of Faces thoughts all throughout the episode, and of course, we, as usual, also have Nina's thoughts throughout this episode. Good Queen Allie with 1L.tumblr.com for more. She's particularly strong on Arianne thoughts. We've got a lot of great predictions as well as strong interpretations of what's going on here that we've all worked together on, and we're excited to share that with you. First of all, though, it is Mother's Day. Often an episode or a live stream falls on a holiday, and I don't think this is the first time we've had a Mother's Day episode, but it's very much worth celebrating and mentioning. Happy Mother's Day to all moms out there, to Malario, that's Doran's wife, and Doran's mom, whose name we don't know. She was the Princess of Dorne. Long-standing small grievance was George over that. Give us her name. Yeah, he just is like, oh. So what are you gonna do? If you all have live questions about Arianne, about Doran, about the Golden Company, about Darkstar, about Damon Sand, about what's going on in this chapter or coming forward or anything related, feel free to ask live. We'll get to all the questions at the end. And of course, we always take questions in advance as well. If you're on Patreon or our Discord or our Facebook group, you can send those ahead of time, our Slack or on Twitter, all the different ways we interact with y'all. Brand Winslow sends a super chat, says, happy Valar Rereadis Sunday, everyone. Glad to be back on after a week off. Question, will the game stream be back this coming Friday? Yes, it will. I did have a hard drive crash. My whole hard drive died, and I did lose the save games as well as a lot of other stuff. So nothing too irreplaceable, thankfully. There's no harm to History of Westeros podcast as far as like files lost or anything like that. So, but no fun to lose your hard drive. So yes, we'll be back this Friday with a new house. I think we're going to do House Velaryon. That's my initial instinct there, in honor of House of the Dragon and all that. Tommy Pappas also sends a super chat, says, happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. Fur mamas as well. Actually, that's not a super chat, but just an excellent comment. Oh, it was? Okay. Okay, cool. Well, thanks, Tommy. Appreciate that. Yes, all the fur mamas as well as the human moms out there. Each episode, we like to start with a brief history of the chapter itself, a little meta chapter history. This one was published January 21st, 2013. As I said before, officially published. This was the 4th chapter released. It came 8 months, roughly, after the infamous Missoula Con that gave us several chapters all at once. That's still going to be a standout for all time. So this is the second of the fully released chapters, meaning not counting ones that were only read aloud. The first one, of course, being Theon. Let's do a brief synopsis and get to the discussions. The first line is, on the morning that she left the Water Gardens, her father rose from his chair to kiss her on both cheeks. It's a moving moment, a difficult thing for him to do, and so is Arianne's mission. Doran is a religious man, so perhaps he chose a party of 7 to honor the gods and perhaps win a bit of their favor. Along those lines, her father implores Arianne to be safe, and she agrees. She understands that she is the future of Dorne. It's a confidence we've not seen in her POV since her failed coup. That means she has to protect herself, but she doesn't actually seem that worried along the way. What's on her mind as much as anything else is her brother and the woman her brother has been sent to marry, Daenerys Targaryen. She no longer feels threatened by Quentin as it pertains to Sunspear and her title, but he's still going to outrank her in a sense if he winds up as king. Readers may shake their head a bit at this, knowing Daenerys wasn't interested in marrying him when he was alive. Her odds of marrying him now that he's dead are decidedly lower, though we'll see about Jon Snow. Arianne insists that she loves her brother while admitting she doesn't know him very well. It's not very convincing, however, not to the reader, nor Sir Damon Sand. Of course, Arianne does not know her brother is dead, and her worries are a major occupation. She has plenty of time to think given the monotony of travel across the desert. She thinks about Sir Damon, her former relationship with him, her friends, many of whom are still paying the price for her attempted coup. She reflects on how foolish she was, how she's responsible for what happened to them and to Sir Aerys and Darkstar. They wonder how Obara and Hota are faring against him, and well, ditto, we also wonder. We meet another of Oberyn's daughters, as she is one of the 7 in this party. She's known to joust and race and behave in ways that remind us of both her father and Lyanna Stark, who herself died in Dorne. They do eventually arrive at the seat of House Tolland, where further detail emerges about the dragons in play in the Game of Thrones. One source is particularly unusual, however. The young girl Tiora Tolland seems to have recurring dragon dreams and uses language we've seen before. Language she has no access to. That gives her dreams an air of authenticity to us readers. But to her family, she's an object of exasperation, denigrated and not taken seriously at all. They speak of John Connington, but they don't know much, and nothing we haven't learned in prior chapters. His disinterest in women comes up here as Arianne is considering what options she might have. Seduction, that won't get her anywhere, and good for her. She doesn't need to catch grayscale. Beyond that, the lack of knowledge of Aegon and Connington and the rest is the point. They are going in somewhat blind. And Doran hates acting without information. He kind of just hates acting in general, but hey, they don't dare hope that this Aegon is real, but if he is, he's Doran's nephew, the son of his beloved sister Elia. But where is Quentin and the dragons and Daenerys? For all this uncertainty, they have armies waiting in the 2 passes that connect Doran to the rest of the 7 kingdoms. They have orders to respond to certain passwords, and Arianne can give those commands if need be. One of those armies has the men of House Tolland, and Lady Nymella wonders if they would be better defending their homes with all this news of sellswords, pirates, and krakens. We know these are all legitimate threats, well described in other chapters. But her worry communicates to Arianne that many Dornish lords and ladies are probably wondering the same thing. Doran is not the only one who needs more clarity about what's happening to the north. A piece of news that did reach them, however, is of Viserys Targaryen's gruesome crowning by Khal Drogo. Though they don't know Drogo by name, they do know the name of his wife, and Arianne wonders how Daenerys could allow her husband to kill her brother. In this moment, her thoughts are uncomfortably understanding of Dany's predicament and why she might choose to remove a troublesome brother. She understands not wanting to be subordinate to such, especially when said brother is weak or soft or what have you. And these thoughts are set to drive her actions as she and her party of 7 take ship across the Sea of Dorne on their way to the Golden Company, Jon Connington, and an Aegon VI they suspect is fake, plus whatever else awaits them in the Stormlands and beyond. That, my friends, is Arianne 1, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? AKA, Oh Cousin, Who Art Thou? Let's have some reactions. Let's see, Joe, let's start with you. You've got some great notes here, and Emily, then we'll go on to you.
Yeah, I'm just glad to have Arianne back, to be honest. It seems like ages. I mean, it has been 2 books, really. We did get to see her a little bit in Dance with the Watcher with Hotar's lone chapter, but I think that actually makes it worse. That was kind of a tease. I think I would have preferred to not have her, because we get that glimpse of her like on side with Doran, and she's kind of been brought into the fold, but we want to see it from her point of view, not Hotar's. As lovely as Hotar is, he doesn't really give that introspection that you'd really like.
True.
And to be honest, she's just always been one of my favorite characters. She's the main pillar of the Dornish storyline. I really like the Dornish storyline. So she's the star of that, and I just appreciate how this chapter it deals with her personal growth, but it also pays note to the size of the task in front of her, which is quite a hard thing to do. The chapter itself has a pretty heavy responsibility for re-establishing Arianne, because like I say, it has been ages. It's been a long time, both in the book and for us covering the book, since we actually got to speak about her. So we've got to re-establish that. We've got to re-establish what's going on in Dorne, in the multiple plot lines going on in Dorne. And then we've got to merge perhaps the biggest storyline in Winds, maybe the return of the Targaryens, pretty arguable, with the southern central Westeros plot. Like, we've got to bring them across. So this is probably going to be our first chance to do that in Winds. Maybe Jon Connington sneaks in before this, but probably not. Probably this, I would bet.
Yeah.
And so in this chapter, we get to represent the 3 questions that all of Westeros are soon going to have to go through in, are you going to side with those Targaryens? Which one are you going to pick if they both come? Do you believe Aegon's story? And eventually, what about Daenerys? And this chapter manages to hit on all 3 of those, and Arianne, and all the establishment. So it's a pretty good one. Yeah, like I said, it's got a lot to bear, especially in just these preview chapters that we have. It's the only Dornish window. It's the only window into Aegon. Like I say, one of the biggest storylines in Winds. So our only real Westeros window. Like, I know we have Theon, but he's so very far away, and Sansa's kind of out of the way in the Vale. So this has really got a lot riding for it, and I think it meets the call, to be honest.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I didn't really think about how there's most of the Westerosi plot lines we've gotten from TWOW are mostly, like you said, in Sansa's case, she's very much, I mean, we thoroughly covered how Peter is even potentially cutting off communication and hiding certain pieces of news. So it really does add that element of being off to the side and not knowing what's going on and not being as involved with everything else that's happening in mainland Westeros. So that's a really good point. Also, I think it's important to note here that there's definitely been a change in Arianne's attitude. She's no longer wondering about Dorne and her place. She still has similar worries, but they're in a different spot now, as opposed to, she doesn't want to be subordinate to Quentin. And it's a big deal too that this conflict has just shifted a little bit. Instead of worrying about her title, she's worried about her brother's title, which used to be sort of similar. So what do you think about, what's your general reaction to this chapter, Emily, and anything else you want to add to the beginning here?
Yeah, I think this is a really transformational chapter for Arianne. It's the first time that we've seen her in a while. It's showing the many ways that she's grown since the time in the Spear Tower. That conversation with Doran at the front, really kind of sets the tone right off the bat. He's talking about dispatching her as his eyes and ears and voice. And, she's having a lot of thoughts, not in just what she says to him, but internally about how she can't fail him and how, she is taking this mantle of responsibility up for sure. I think it's equally important to note, though, that in all the ways that she's maturing, we're also seeing little glimmers of ways that she's still the same old Arianne. She's not all of a sudden transformed into this perfect princess who's doing everything right. That'd be bad writing if a little bit of isolation and a couple of conversations with her dad had fully transformed her from this kind of, from this like somewhat petty and failed plot maker to some mastermind of strategy and conspiracy. And I'm glad that we're not seeing that here. George is giving us these little hints here and there that yes, progress has been made and you can see that shift in her internal attitude, but it also still illustrates, that she's got a little ways to go and that, her flaws aren't going to ever fully disappear.
I think that's very well said too. And the way the chapter's laid out, it starts you off with this like, oh, she's changed. But then as things progress, you see her inner monologue and you start to see, oh, these are some familiar thoughts. She is having similar thoughts. They are more mature. They're more advanced. They're more sophisticated, but they're still coming from a similar place of anxiety, of pride, and a few other things that are related. Mostly survival too. I mean, let's be honest. She's worried about having to kneel to Quentin is partly a pride thing, an ego thing maybe, but it's also something that she worries about as far as her future and safety, things like that. So a lot of things wrapped up in it. But this initial quote, it's one of the other things seems to have come to understand. This moment, it's very meaningful to her. She gets what her father is doing here with this act of standing and how much that means to her. Joe, you pulled that line. You tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's on like the first page, if I remember right. I haven't got the text right in front of me, but it's pretty immediate that we have this, like you say, this really, really symbolic gesture of Doran actually standing up. I did have to go back and check because I thought we had seen him stand up at some point, but I did check today and we haven't. We've never actually seen him stand up. Okay. So this is obviously a big deal for him, and I do wonder if he did the same for Quentin, maybe, and he knows what a big deal this is. We'll come to talk Quentin later, but the fact, not just his symbolism from Doran, but also at the end of that quote in Arianne thinking, he believes in me, I will not fail him. That sounds exactly like Quentin all the way through Dance. So you can see how they've both got these parallels of they're both going off on Daddy's mission now. They both don't want to fail. We're going to see some very, very similar thought trains, I think, from Arianne as Quentin did. Hopefully it will end slightly differently, but you can see how they're going to both have that pressure. And yeah, I just think it's really important to get that straight off at the beginning that she's appreciating Doran, because like we said, we saw that she was already on side in Dance and she had gone over and she was part of the mix there. But getting it from her, that's entirely different from getting it through Hotar. So I think George is really just kind of knocking one out of the park at the beginning, really putting that down, considering how strained their relationship was before in her 2 chapters, and just setting that off. And I think, to be fair, it's like one of the biggest things that actually happens in the whole chapter. Like, not a lot of real things happen in this chapter. Like, at the beginning, we're told she's going on the journey. That's pretty much, like, there's not actually much else. It's a lot more thinking and deliberation and internal thought for the rest of the chapter. So it really, really does start off pretty quickly, George, which, he often does.
True that. Well said. So let's build on what we've discussed so far here and talk about Arianne's personality, because you're right, that is what's going. Her inner monologue is the core of this chapter, and it's sort of impacted by things Damon Sand says and certain other thoughts that come up. Like, he's sort of her sounding board. I think one of you even wrote that in the notes here, which I thought was a really good way to put it. So in our last episode, we talked about how changes to Sansa, how she's coming along. She's a little different now. And that is a very good topic to apply to this chapter as well. So I'm going to read this quote, and then Emily, you've got some great takes on this, so we'll throw it over to you. It was my own fault. Arianne had made them part of her plot to steal off with Myrcella Baratheon and crown her queen, an act of rebellion meant to force her father's hand. But someone's loose tongue had undone her. The clumsy conspiracy had accomplished nothing except to cost poor Myrcella part of her face and Sir Aerys Oakheart his life.
I'm glad you kind of threw it back to Feast there, because in doing some reading for this, I was looking at Arianne 1 of Feast, where she's thinking to herself and says about her father, "It's time he put his burdens down, but I will suffer no slights to his honor or his person." This, I think, has the smackings of someone who was raised with a lot of privilege, but is kind of missing the big picture or has a little ways to mature. It actually reminds me of kind of a mix of Sansa's earlier naivete, but there's also a bit of Theon's prideful assumptions in there regarding his place in House Greyjoy as he's returning to Pike. He has all these kind of ideas about what his father or his uncle should be doing, and this quote really drove the similarities home with that. But here in the Sable chapter, we see how much Arianne's relationship with Doran has been repaired by his empathetic but stern handling of her failed plot, and of course by his actual inviting of her finally into this conspiracy in a major way, something that her brother was invited into quite a bit earlier. The change in their relationship is on display right away, as we've kind of already covered at the top of the chapter, when he says that quote that Joe covered, that he believes in me, I will not fail him. This thought comes during that emotional farewell, and it's really nice to see that Arianne's internal monologue and how she's thinking about her father, not just what she says to him, is changing. It's more likely that these are her true opinions, not just lip service she's giving someone. So to me, this was a lot of progression towards, seeing him as the respected leader that, hopefully she can, follow in his footsteps someday, rather than some old fool who she needs to step aside.
Yeah, that's great. Really well said. I think it's important to note there, or at least maybe ask the question, would she have reacted with this way to him standing if this was the Arianne who was still thinking of rebelling against him? Like, she may have just been more cynical about it and thought he was trying to manipulate her, because that's where she was at. She was like, oh, he's trying to manipulate me. Now she has realized he wasn't really manipulating her, at least not in ways that she totally disagrees with, and she also realizes that he was going to give me Doran, so she's got a lot more respect for him. So I think that she would not have seen it the same way before. What do you think, Joe? Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
I was going to say, just in general, it's interesting. She, is thinking about herself so much in the earlier chapters, but here she's like making note of other people's body language and watching other people quite a bit more. Not just the objects of her seduction, but like everyone in the room. She's paying a lot more attention to.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I agree. Especially in that meeting, like you say, she was like ultra bratty. Like, she went too far the other way. Like, I'm going to sit down. Bring Hotar back if you don't want to. If you want to tell me off. Those kind of things. Like, she's going too far the other way. But I quite like Emily bringing up the feast quote there, because you can almost see this progression through quotes. Because in Dance, again, I went back to Hotar's chapter. I can't remember which sand snake it is, but one of them says something to the effect of, you'll do nothing, Doran, you never do anything. And Arianne actually does speak up in defense and say, you do him wrong, or something along those lines. So we've actually got this little progression now from what Emily just said, feast to Dance, and now we get to see the whole thing on display, like you've just gone through. And I think comparing her to Sansa is a pretty good idea. They're actually almost exactly lined up in terms of how long we've been away. I think the Princess in the Tower was the chapter before Sansa's last chapter, Feast. So depending on where they are in Winds, they're going to be pretty close to being that far away, even though we have seen Arianne cheating a bit.
That's a good point.
But as to what you said, there's tons of maturing and owning up done by Arianne, especially in the early part of the chapter, like Emily was saying. She really looks back on that kind of failed practice run, that failed like pre-season game that the Myrcella plot was. Now she's walking into the real thing, into like the playoffs, and she's realized that I can't mess around, because look what happens when I do mess around. And in all fairness to her, she doesn't excuse anything. She doesn't say it was this person's fault or that person's fault. She admits what part she played. And Emily made a really good point there. She is thinking about the consequences of what has happened to other people. She literally lists them. She goes through the whole party in part to remind us, because I think some of them might come up later, but also because she is feeling the weight of those decisions, which is going to matter now, because those decisions are even bigger. She's got much more power. Like you mentioned in the synopsis, there's those 2 Dornish armies at the click of her fingers. There's a lot more people than the original 6 she could affect. And that mission, it plays throughout her mind in the whole chapter. Like, she is absolutely focused on it. She's looking at all angles. She's asking Damon for every possible way to approach it that she can. It's her obsession, a bit like lots of people like Stannis in up in the north. Like, he's got 1 minute, 1 mission, 1 line at the moment, is to win that war. And Arianne's getting to the same point, because she knows how important it is. She knows she's walking out into the main political stage. She's got to make an impression to Jon Connington, to Aegon, whoever. And actually, as you just mentioned something that sparked off my mind. You were talking about her safety as well. They do become very aware in this chapter. They are walking into a war zone. And I mean, she's spent her whole life in Sunspear, really. She's never been in any kind of danger or anything, really. So this is a very big thing, just entering the world. It is a real growing up chapter, especially early on. I really like that about this chapter.
Right on. Yeah, very well said. It is good to compare Sansa to Arianne. I think we did that back when they had their end of their feast arcs, and so you're right. I think to mention that it's been a similar amount of time off between them, and the maturing process is a big part of both their arcs. But it's fair to point out too, Arianne's quite a bit older than Sansa, so she's had a lot more life experience, and obviously the circumstances are a bit different, even though there's a lot of things in that are similar. So that is probably our best comparison at this point. But
that's a interesting argument, actually, isn't it? Who has actually had more life experience? Because Sansa she is younger, but she has been through like way more than Arianne as well.
That's a good point. Yeah,
a lot more controversy anyway. So that'd be interesting to kind of do a direct head-to-head there.
Yeah, whereas Arianne has experienced kind of the normalcy of growing up, of experiences. She hasn't had a lot of difficulty as of yet in her life. It's been the exact opposite for Sansa after a certain age. They both probably had fairly, idyllic childhoods. We hear it described from Arianne at the Water Gardens and learning different things. And
that's a good point. Yeah, just changed for Arianne's arc change, and Sansa's, her world was thrown into chaos much earlier than Arianne's. That's a very good point. And let's see here. One thing, even that Sansa is maybe getting old enough to do, we certainly see it. She hasn't seduced anyone, but she's certainly starting to use that element of her character. She flirts with Harry for a purpose, not because she's interested in him, right? Things like that, and of course, that is something we can compare to Arianne very distinctly, because Arianne is like ready to use seduction on anyone if it's like she's one of her go-to weapons, and well, she's good at it, so why not? But she still has mixed feelings over how it worked out the last time. Emily, why don't you read us this quote, and then we'll get into talking about seduction and how that might affect things going forward here.
Yeah. In the end, he could not live with what he'd done. Why else would her White Knight have charged right into Ariohota's long axe to die the way that he did? I was a foolish, willful girl playing a Game of Thrones like a drunkard rolling dice.
Yeah, so she's gonna use that, and we've already talked about how she's not going to use it on Connington. Of course, he's not interested. Neither would she be if she knew what was going on with his hand. So, but it kind of goes both ways here, right? She's not going to go after Connington that way, but she might go after young Aegon. And Arianne is good at this. Aegon has never had a relationship. I think we could maybe predict how that would go, which is he would be probably just go head over heels, but maybe not. That's not a sure thing. It just seems like it's a strong possibility. But let's talk about seduction and how this is going to affect things going forward. We'll start with you, Joe.
Yeah, well, we know it was her weapon of choice at the beginning. That's basically how we were introduced to her through Aerys. And she is thinking of it throughout this chapter, again, like you say, and she will try and use it if she thinks it's going to work. But she also kind of realizes that she doesn't have complete control of it. It goes two ways. She can be seduced as well. She mentions Darkstar and kind of thinks of oh, that was a big mistake. I shouldn't have gone that way. And she worries that might happen again. We could easily have those same worries. Probably not with Aegon. I don't think he's smart enough to use it that way, but it could still get her in trouble. Or we could see the same thing with Damon. That kind of comes up in this chapter as well. We see her slip up a little bit with Damon and actually kind of get rebuffed, and she doesn't really know how to quite handle that. And you've got to remember, she's already had one of those recently. Again, I bring up Dance. She tried the weapon with Balon Swan and it didn't work at all. So she might be kind of looking for a bit of a booster, a bit of a confidence booster soon to make sure she hasn't lost her skills completely. And it probably will come up at some point. Like I say, I think she will probably struggle with either Aegon or Damon or both. There could easily be a little triangle forming there. It could go anyway, but it's another thing present throughout the chapter. I've got to say, to be honest, more than most chapters, all the themes seem to all be present like all the time in this chapter. Everything is kind of like always there. Like normally we get like sections and you can kind of pick out bits, but I think George does a really good job of just keeping everything going all the way through this chapter.
And that's difficult to do, right? At a beginning chapter like this, that's usually something that's like a culmination. You like bring themes together after a while. I mean, I guess Definitely. This is a sixth book, so you could say that it has been a while. But anyway, what do you think about this, Emily? What are your takes on the future of Seduction, Arianne's arc, and all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe makes a good point here. And I think like a travel chapter where, like you said, a lot of the important stuff happens up front and then we're just kind of getting places. It makes sense that you can weave a lot of themes into an otherwise maybe a little bit boring plot-wise story or chapter. But as far as the seduction side of things, I think it's important to see she is becoming a bit more capable of knowing the limits of her seduction. The rebuffing she's gotten from Balon Swan, but also, the idea when she's starting to think about John Connington and not immediately going, oh, my only weapon here is seduction, kind of taking a step back and taking herself out of that kind of go-to strategy shows a little bit of growth. But the clear confusion about why Damon is a little bit cold to her now when she's trying things out on him. So she still has some learning to go there. To us, it's pretty obvious why Damon would feel slighted by the idea that he's good enough to take to bed, but definitely not good enough to marry. But she just seems kind of confused by that. Like, what's the problem? Like, other people seem good with this arrangement and just kind of aloof of the whole thing. So I think this could be some foreshadowing that she's going to make another miscalculation in the power of her sexual appeal, but that it probably, I don't see it happening with John Connington. I think it could be with Aegon or just the whole drama of, she might be going after Aegon might be into that, but we've got other people in play who are really trying to push her towards John Connington to keep Aegon free. I think, there's just a lot of things that could go sideways there with a character like Arianne. So,
we've been talking about Daenerys, right, and about what Arianne thinks of her, and I really keep thinking about how they have a lot of similarities between them, specifically to do with Damon Sand, in terms of their dealing with their interest with someone who isn't really good enough for the position that they're in. They're both struggling with it quite a lot. Obviously, Dany with Dario, and then Arianne with Damon here.
Guy with a 6-letter name that starts with D. Gotta get that
They
D.
do both want that D.
Oh boy, we've stumbled on something that we maybe didn't want to stumble on. No, that's really good thought. I didn't think to connect Daenerys's relationship to Dario like that. That's a really good catch. And a take from Nina here. I think she's definitely on board with the idea that Aegon is going to be the target. She thinks that she thinks about trying to sway John Connington, but she doesn't have to. Or she's going to realize that she can just bypass John Connington and just, if she wins Aegon over and has him in her corner, it doesn't necessarily matter what John Connington wants. Of course, he has power, but she'll have the upper hand if she gets in good with the young king. And Nina also asked a good question. What is John Connington going to think of Arianne? He doesn't seem to care a lot about women, partly because of his orientation and because he's just kind of a jerk. I mean, he's just he is, right? He's very selfish about this mission and hiding his disease and all that. But he does kind of also see this child as his son of a sort, right? It's sort of an adopted child. Vibes of Aegon, of Jon and Ned, but in a much different way. Ned never used Jon to fix his past, whereas Jon is using this kid to fix his past and fix his old relationship with Rhaegar that he never got to have. So there's a lot of the pathos behind it is very different, but it makes sense maybe from a plot perspective, kind of seeing how it's going to play out, to say, yes, Arianne might realize what's somewhat obvious, that if she gets control of the king, she has control of everything. And that's been said since the beginning. Since, again, Ned Stark comes up. What did Renly tell Ned right before Cersei's coup? he who controls the king controls the kingdom. And that's very much going on here. This is not necessarily what we would have suspected as a way for the king to be controlled by a woman who's gotten, they've fallen in love or whatever, or in lust, whatever you want to call it. So I think that's a great way to look at it, and to see, we don't know what's going to happen with John Cunningham, how he's going to react to this, to see like, oh God, she's seducing him and she's manipulating him, and he's going to probably think of it as much worse than it really is, but it probably is going to be threatening to him, especially if she encourages him to work against Daenerys, which is not a good idea. That's certainly what's in her mind in this chapter. That's certainly where we see things. So I think there's an important oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you can just see the situation like forming, can't you? Because you can see Jon pushing Aegon in that direction, because we've already seen them like get a bit tiffy. Aegon wants to do his thing. Jon wants to keep him under wraps still. He's already thought about, like, he wants to pick the Kingsguard and Aegon wants to pick the Kingsguard. It's going to be the same with brides. And you can see, like you say, like the tighter he holds, Aegon, I don't think Aegon's going to need that much persuading anyway if Arianne really puts the moves on. But you can see, I'll annoy Dad. I'll annoy old Jon here pretty easily, and away he goes. And I just think you can just see it forming too easily, and I think that would be a real another real comparison we can make to Sansa, because we probably will be seeing the exact same thing going on with Harry. And you can imagine, like, if this wasn't a risk of war, if there was no risk of losing half your country and dragons coming across, you could still see Doran saying to Arianne, like, oh, maybe you should go over there and have a go with it. Like, if we all knew Aegon was real or whatever. Like, that's the exact kind of thing he would want to do. It's exactly the same as what Peter Baelish is doing with Sansa, like just using what they think is at their disposal.
Yeah.
So you can really see the comparisons between those two again.
So I think Nina's right to suspect that Connington is going to not like Arianne, because he's kind of got control over Aegon, but Aegon's already breaking free of that control, and with Arianne coming into the picture, he's going to lose even more of that, and you could see how he might just be kind of on the outs as far as an advisor, and that would just drive him nuts. And of course, he's dangerous and bloody and revenge minded, and won't stint or be ashamed of doing brutal things. But also
the idea.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The idea of this kind of Tywin wannabe having Tyrion's advice about Daenerys, and you don't need her being quoted to him at some point as part of this potential marriage arrangement just has me laugh. I really hope we get something like that.
And it's such an easy sell. Not only is Arianne hot and good at seduction, which is maybe enough, but Aegon believes he's real. And Arianne, if she's kind of suspicious he's not, but she's not going to tell him that. If she's trying to seduce him, that's not going to be part of seduction. By the way, look how hot I am. But also, you're not really Aegon. Like, that's not going to be that's not really how you seduce someone. I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure you don't say that kind of thing. So, and she gets to say, look, you're the son of my aunt, and all this stuff, and it's meant to be. Like, it just fits so well. They've already talked about how they have to
make sense
Dorne
historically as well.
Yeah, it just fits so well. So I think this Cyvasse, we've seen a lot of Cyvasse in the last few books. I think this is very telling when Damon's like, there's other pieces beside the dragon. And to me, that's suggestive of this very plot line, that she's going to focus on the king, which is the dragon, sort of like the strongest piece. That's not quite how it works in chess. The queen's the strongest piece, but it's the same metaphor, right? Just controlling the center, controlling the one that matters most, and letting everything else kind of fall by the wayside, just controlling the strongest piece. And it speaks to how she might focus on Aegon and just work her magic on him and let everything else fall around that. Emily, you've got some thoughts here on this as well, this particular passage as well. So let's hear from you here.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it's Damon, who she obviously has a past with, who's giving her this advice here. You have other pieces besides the dragon princess. Try moving them sometime. So, winding it back to Feast, as I'll continue to do, we see Arianne get kind of a bit of tunnel vision around her plan to crown Myrcella, and just being so sure it's totally going to work out. Me and my 7 people are going to totally overthrow the government. she isn't really thinking broadly enough about all the players in the game and the limits of her own influence or her perspective at that point. And here, again, through this Cyvasse symbolism, Damon warns her to consider other pieces. This seems like one of those lessons that isn't really sinking in quickly enough for Arianne. And I'm curious if it ever will. I also think it foreshadows a bit of the reasoning behind Damon's place in her party to help her consider all of the available information, not just what's directly in front of her eyes or obvious to her in that moment.
Oh, very good. Yeah. And it's another point that's worth mentioning here. Nina writes that, yeah, Arianne's trying to convince herself that this family conflict within her own house is over, but it clearly isn't. She's still just constantly thinking about her brother, and we might say, oh, well, that's going to work itself out. Her brother's dead, but not if she's already set herself up in advance to be positioned against him. Like in advance of Quentin and Dany arriving, she's already married Aegon and rallied the realm in advance of that, and started the propaganda campaign that we sort of expect, or at least played into that we expect to really hit Dany hard and make her look less appealing to Westeros as a ruler. So that's a really big deal, I think. And so, Joe, what do you think here about this stuff? I see you have some more great notes on this overall stuff.
Yeah, I think you and Nina and Emily all kind of knocked out of the park. That dragon thing is just kind of hit you in the face straight away. I know what you're saying, George. I know what you're up to. That kind of thing. To me, it's a little worrying symbolically that Arianne's not improved her game at all, especially after the conversation with Doran, where he's like, don't play if you don't think you can win. And she maybe should have taken that on board and done some more practicing, but maybe not. I mean, she's got bigger things to think about right now, to be fair, than practicing her Cyvasse game. But I wonder, I mean, your points are all great. I wonder if maybe George is actually giving us a hint of the other direction of, okay, you're fixating on dragons. You're all looking east, or, well, north now. You're all looking out of Dorne. And I think we'll probably come to talk about this a bit later with some other questions. But I do wonder if maybe that's a hint that Doran, I guess, especially, isn't looking behind him to the west, to the rest of Dorne enough, and he's kind of turned his back. He's always kind of been fixated on these massive plans anyway, but now that they're actually here, he's really not paying attention to what's going on in his own country. I spoke on Radio Westeros live stream a few months ago about that political situation and what could come in winds. I really think we will get to see a lot of that boil up. So I just wonder if that's a hint of, like, don't look that direction all the time, because stuff is going on behind you. They're going to be reacting to these dragons as well, and reacting to how you react, and you need to be aware of all the pieces. And maybe that means other people in King's Landing, but it might also mean the other Dornish.
That's a great point, because if we were to think of another character, probably the only other really important character that's used seduction who as a weapon or as a tool is Cersei. And if we were to think about Arianne and review this chapter and her other chapters, has she ever given a fig of a thought to Cersei? I don't think so. Very little, right? A fig. What an interesting way for me to phrase that. Yeah, she just hasn't, like, it just has, you're right. So this is an example of, she's not thinking about the Tyrells, she's not thinking about Cersei, she's not thinking about the Stark, she's not really thinking about anyone but Aegon, and maybe a little bit about John Connington and Quentin and Daenerys. So that's a really good point. And Emily, let me kick it over to you. You've have at least a few notes about Cersei and some other things here too. So that's
yeah,
point.
Sure. I'm going to kind of take it back to Arianne's sexuality a little bit, because I think that's where she and Cersei have a lot of overlap. So obviously, we see Arianne wield her sexuality before we even get to her first POV chapter. We immediately get this femme fatale image in her interactions with Aerys Oakheart. But as we're introduced to her and see her in her own point of view, we see her fail at plotting and try to progress forward. A different picture starts to emerge of her, and the more details we get, we kind of start maybe understanding why sexuality is such a weapon for her. We get this image of a girl who at 14 reads a letter from her father to her brother, which allegedly is setting her aside her birthright in favor of what she assumes is a more like kind of traditional Westerosi patriarchy, where the male will inherit, not the firstborn. It doesn't feel like a coincidence that it's right around this time when she's 14 that she loses her virginity to Damon Sand, who's in this chapter, and in general starts exploring her sexuality as a way to gain back some agency and a sense of control over her life. feeling like her father has lost confidence in her qualities as a leader, she kind of falls back onto more traditional feminine mode of control, particularly in the time period, which would be sex. We obviously see Cersei do this, not always successfully. She thinks she's a bit more clever about it than she is. And, there's some overlap there with Arianne, absolutely. Yeah. Now that Arianne knows the truth about Doran's plotting, she's starting to flex those leadership skills again for the first time in a while, trying to be strategic and to emulate her father. But the familiar patterns that she's developed over the last, 10 years don't just evaporate away. She can't help herself with Damon a few times in this chapter, just egging him on or, making a little bit of an advance at him. And we all expect seduction in general to be a major part of what's coming with Aegon. She's already written off John Connington, as I mentioned before.
Yeah. Smart choice.
With her embodying the future of Doran, I'm very interested to see where she lands, more like the cautious, strategic side of Doran and her father, or the seductive and dangerous uncle and the Sand Snakes as well.
Yeah, is she going to take risks because she sees bigger risks down the line if she doesn't take risks now? And if she's operating on bad information, I mean, just setting yourself up to be the enemy of Daenerys is just by itself, that's just a terrible idea. Or against whoever's the dragon side are on, yeah. Which, that's sort of self-explanatory. All right, let's talk about some of the new/newish characters introduced in this chapter. Some of them we've technically seen before. Daemon Sand is a good example. We've seen him before, but I don't know that he's spoken until this chapter. And if he did, it was very little. He was Oberyn's squire. So we saw him around by the trial by combat. He's the one who tossed him his spear, helped him get dressed. It's said that he's an excellent swordsman. He's very insightful. Obviously, he makes a lot of cutting comments to Arianne. He kind of sorts of, at some points, maybe reads her better than she's reading herself. And I'm curious about what this character means. He seems to be the most prominent of her party of 7. That doesn't mean it'll stay that way. There's certainly other characters we're going to talk about, but he's certainly the one that has the biggest role in this chapter, and he's the one we've seen the most before. So he's a little bit more background on him. He's of a bastard of House Illyrian, and the Illyrians are, as we can see, they're only a few days away from Sunspear. They're vassals of Sunspear and have a long-standing relationship, which is important. Or, I'm sorry, they're not a few days away. I was thinking of the Tollands, but the Illyrians are close by as well. And they are thus have a long relationship with the Martells. But interestingly, Daemon Sand's father is married into the Ironwoods, so I don't necessarily think that's going to lead to trouble. But it's something to keep in mind because these family loyalties sometimes can be split. But that's a little off field. Let me turn it back over to.
I wanted to say one thing I think about when I think of Damon is how traumatized he must actually be by his experience with Oberyn during the trial. Like, I mean, he grew up. This was, he grew up as his squire. He's known him for so long. I mean, anyone seeing that probably was a little traumatized, but to see his head kind of explode there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I wonder what his thoughts are on that. He certainly brings him up a few times. His name gets mentioned, and we'll touch on that. But that's a good point. Yeah, you wonder, because he was a witness. We saw Ilaria's pain. She, wailed, and obviously that was her lover. Of course, she's going to be, and the father of many of her children. Of course, she's going to be upset. But yeah, I guess Damon sort of suffered in silence there.
I wonder if it's an indication that they were not ever lovers. I don't think they were ever.
Yeah, I don't think they were, but it's possible though.
I think it's just one of those things people say about someone who's queer. They're like, oh, we must be with a young boy.
Yeah, the same things were said about Daemon Targaryen, which is an interesting, let me go ahead and jump ahead to that since I mentioned his name. Nina makes some notes here on the naming convention here and how that's important. Like, having a name like Damon, there's only a few Daemons in the story, and they're all very notable for being like rebel types. Like, you have Daemon Targaryen, who's about to be a much more prominent character on House of the Dragon, was, definitely had some issues with his brother's rule and wanted to be the heir. And of course, that's a whole nother story, but you guys know what I mean. Blackfyre rebellions, Daemon Targaryen, right? That's a huge deal. And
we later have an actual gay Damon as well.
That's true. Yeah. So it's a really notable name choice for George. You wonder if he's doing something there, or if maybe it's just he just likes that name. But Nina also writes how he's a bit of a parallel to Kristen Cole along the lines of kingmaking. May as well call up the name of the actual kingmaker himself. They both have this aristocratic lineage, but they're not very high up on the chain. In Kristen Cole's case, he got big because he was an amazing warrior, but House Cole, not very big. Illyrian is a pretty decent house, but he's a bastard, so he loses a step in society because of that, or a couple steps, doesn't have a claim or inheritance or anything like that. So there's definitely a lot of these sort of elements that we associate with overthrow, with rebellion, that are all part of this, let alone some of the other characters that some of you guys are going to mention here. I can see them in your notes. So, Joe, starting with you, what do you think about Damon?
Yeah, I'm pretty interested in Damon, although in this chapter, I think you mentioned earlier, he is like Damon Sounding Board should be his name, really, if that can be a bastard name, because that is the role he serves from the majority. Yeah, Damon Sounding Board. It does work. You can get it together if you really want. You can.
You're right.
If you really try. But he's basically there as someone for Arianne to bounce ideas off of, which she needs, because as we said earlier, she is walking into this new territory. She's not confident. She doesn't really know what she's doing. Like she could pretty much do all this in her head. He doesn't like supply her with any massive piece of information in this chapter that she didn't know already, really. But she needs to talk it out, and she needs to kind of reassure herself and kind of double layer. So that's her use for him. But our use for him, I think, is that he provides this extra window into Oberyn's life. And given how much we all love Oberyn, but how short time we got with him, like he's one of the most we'd like really like to know more about. And even just in a few sentences, he really achieves that. He gets me excited when he says like just the possibility that Oberyn wanted to kill Darkstar at some point.
Right.
And you can imagine that, Joel. Like, okay, yeah, let's have some more of that, please. Just tell us what Oberyn thought of everybody and all these things that he planned and all. Like, that's our one window, really. I don't think we're probably going to get much of that from Ellaria or Doran. So Damon can be really cool for that. It's a really exciting role for him. But I also think Emily touched on this a bit earlier, like he's a proud man. He does kind of rebuff Arianne later. He's not going to just fall into line, I suppose. He's got his own thing. Maybe that is to do with the trauma that you just mentioned as well. Maybe he's just kind of shutting down at the moment. But I think there's potential for him to be a spanner in the works later if Arianne does go off of Aegon and he becomes jealous. Or there's certainly room for that kind of expansion of role. For Arianne, I think he represents kind of the path not taken. It's a weird choice, to be honest, that Doran sent him along, knowing their history and what went on between them. I imagine it is because he's listed as like the best sword in Dorne now, and at the end of the day, Doran wants Arianne to be safe. But it's still kind of an odd choice. But I think for Arianne, like he does, if there was no big war coming and if there was no revenge plot, if they were in another time, he would be the non-political, non-big game choice. She could have stayed with him. She could have taken him as a paramour. Okay, yeah, like politically, she would still be expected to go and marry someone else. But then again, Oberyn had Ellaria and Doran married Malario from half the world away. So it's not like there's no precedence for choosing who you want if you're the ruler. So, yeah, I think he will represent that. And I think she does touch on that very slightly, but she keeps herself to the mission. She's like, I can't go too far down that road because if I get distracted, well, I know what I'm like when I get distracted with the pretty boys. I need to actually stay on task here. Let's talk about John Connington or Viserys or something else, please, Damon. Don't change the subject.
Yeah, and Tyrion even thinks back when he sees Aegon. He's like, yeah, wash that blue out of your hair, and a lot of the girls in Westeros are gonna look at you real nice. They'll take a long little double take or whatever he says. So that is perhaps setting this up. Yeah, that's a really good point about Oberyn too. Like this guy was his squire, and Oberyn's not like a quiet, secretive guy. This is an outspoken man. So yeah, Damon probably heard a few things. One thing that just occurred to me during this is I hope Damon doesn't like get it in his mind to get revenge on Oberyn's behalf and like challenge the mountain, because that won't go well. Like you thought he was hard to beat when your master went up against him. He's a lot harder to beat now. So Emily, let's throw it over to you. What do you think here about Damon and what some of the things Damon says and all that?
Sure. I think, where Damon goes in the next few chapters is going to tell us a lot. I think there's a good chance that he's actually just like a wise and mature person who 10 years after kind of being rejected by Doran has maybe moved on a little bit more than Arianne has, hopefully. Oberyn obviously has his public image, but privately we found out quite a bit more about him and some of the things that he, was getting up to and how he really was Doran's hand. So there's a good chance that Damon is earned a lot of trust beyond just his skill at arms here. Could be totally wrong, could create some drama, but I'm hoping here maybe this is a way to illustrate, hey, Doran, he's made some mistakes, but he's not a completely terrible player. Maybe this was a good move by him. We'll find out. I also think it's interesting to see Damon be used to add credibility to the danger of Darkstar. We know the audience is never really connected with the idea that Darkstar is a serious threat to anyone besides an ear. But
wear your muffs around Darkstar. Your scaled.
No,
muffs.
Now we have some. Yeah, now we have someone who's apparently this extremely competent warrior, the best sword in Dorne, shield to the heiress of Dorne, warning her that Obara is just as likely to die at Gerald's hands as he is at hers. So it's still a little tell, not show, but I found its inclusion interesting as kind of a way to bring Darkstar back up and to say, you haven't seen much yet, but maybe there is something here to be worried about.
Another point from Nina related to this is along the lines of Kristen Cole and in parallels with Damon Sanders, that Kristen and Rhaena eventually have a falling out. And it's not clear what the circumstances are, and discussing that is for another day. But the bottom line is that happened, and that could be something that may be headed along these lines. Like if Damon disagrees with Arianne's actions, for example, if she does some of the things we suspect, like seduce Aegon and set herself up to be an enemy of Daenerys, I don't know if Damon's going to think that's the smartest call, and that may cause a rift. I'm not sure if he's going to abandon her. That seems like a bit much because he's not going to switch sides. I think that's a bit much. But even that is potentially on the table as a possibility. Also, I forgot to mention this when I was talking about Ryan Illyrian, Damon Sand's father. He was also at King's Landing for the trial. He was in Oberyn's party. So I don't know if that has any impact on him, but it's just a fun little detail to take note of. Let's move on to some of the other characters. Before specifically mentioning any other characters, I think this is where some of Doran's intelligence really shows. He maybe has shortcomings as a plotter. Certainly, there's things to be said about how he arranged Quentin and sent Quentin off in this party that he wasn't prepared for, which argues against what I'm about to say a little bit, which is that he is clever with who he includes in these groups. I think that's something he has a little more insight into. That's something he's very clever with, that he's maybe not as clever with some of the other aspects of intrigue. But I think understanding personalities and how they'll work together, that I think he has a strong handle on, because there's a lot of curiosity here over why Elia Sand was sent and why Damon was sent. And it does seem, whatever your answers are, it's definitely on purpose. It was definitely intentional by Doran's, definitely a choice by Doran, and Arianne even wonders that. Is like, I wonder why she included some of these people. One that I really don't know about is Jane Ladybright. She's hardly speaks, and it's a bit of a vibe of Silva Santagar. Nina writes that was her best friend, one of the ones implicated in the plotting there. So Silva is now, off to marry. I think she's the one that married Lord Estermont. So she might be in big trouble right now with the Golden Company on their island. But anyway, that's another story. So I don't know that I have much to say about Jane Ladybright. She might be just something that comes up later. Do you guys have anything to add about her or about this whole party as a whole?
I think the party as a whole, not so much from Doran's perspective, but it's used early on in the chapter again as that mirror. Arianne thinks of the old party, the pre-season party, then she compares it directly to this one. So that's just another marker very quickly of this is not the same thing. This isn't a jaunt off with my friends. She says earlier on that she can't connect with any of them. They're basically strangers, even Damon to an extent now, and Elia's just a little bit too young. So I think it's just another mark of the change of time, basically, and that this is a new thing we're doing.
It's also like a mark of, this is part of your role if you're going to be the heir of Dorne, is you don't just get to hang out with your friends all the time. Like strategic alliances are important. And I assume, that most of these people were selected for good reason. And you have to be able to make those relationships with people who you aren't best friends with from childhood.
I think it's interesting. I don't know how closely they're related, but Jane Lady Bright, the Lord Treasurer, I guess Lady Treasurer of Sunspear, is related to her as an Alice Lady Bright. And so in terms of growing up together, I feel like probably that's her mother or something like that. Okay. And that they had a connection there, which makes me wonder what she thinks about her daughter marrying Lord Estermont. It's not a bad marriage, in terms of he has land. And she's she's certainly not the heir to House Lady Bright.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, good take. Well, hopefully they'll just be more about her. Maybe there'll be a little more reason for us to take more note of her. But for now, let's move on. Joss Hood and Garibald Shells are the other two knights in the group. Don't really have much to say about them either. Joe, you have a note here. What do you think about these guys?
Yeah, I just think they're like the anti-Damons. Like they make more sense. We don't, to be fair, it's not like we know them particularly well, but so far they just seem like straight, dependable, do what you're told guys. So maybe that's just their role. Maybe Doran's thinking, okay, Damon's got his head on his shoulders. He'll know what to do if anything goes wrong. The other two will follow orders. Maybe they're more than that. We don't know. But so far, yeah, they seem more like Doran type people, just kind of bland. They're there to fill their role types.
It's worth considering because of what we just said about Doran being clever about who he includes in the party. But so far, I think you're right. I don't see any clues. What about you, Emily? Is that kind of how you feel about it?
Yeah, I think we just need to see more of them. I think they're there to kind of be a blank slate for what's to come.
Right on. One of the few things we see from them is interacting with our next characters, Elia Sand, aka Lady Lance. They have a brief exchange, and there's just huge Lyanna vibes. Not just with her, but in this chapter in general, because Arianne has a little bit of that, that's more next chapter, because the next chapter they get taken on their way to their destination, and she's like, it's sort of ambiguous whether it's a kidnapping, which is very much what happens after the tourney of Harrenhal when Rhaegar and Lyanna means like, was that a kidnapping or so I think that fits really well. But like I said, more on that next chapter, which is next week. So, but we'll focus on what's here for now. Elia Sand, one of the most direct lines to Lyanna is George loves to use precise language to connect characters by using the same phrasing. He uses very specific phrases. You all are very familiar with this concept. We've been over it so many times. You've seen it in the examples, but I like re-explaining it every once in a while just to set the stage. So here's an example. In this chapter, the line is, "The girl was mad for horses, which might be why she often smelled like one, to the despair of her mother." Roose Bolton in A Dance with Dragons says about his dead son and then Lyanna, "Horses. The boy was mad for horses. Lady Dustin will tell you. Not even Lord Rickard's daughter could outrace him, and that one was half a horse herself." And then Valena Tolland in this chapter says to Lady Lance, "Are you half horse, child?" Valena asked, laughing in the yard. "Princess, did you bring a stable girl?" And then, if you recall our Sansa chapter, Elaine chapter, we compared Mia Stone quite a bit to Lyanna, and in doing so, we connected their horse riding and how there's a lot to do with that in making that connection. And so Robert Aaron at one point says, "I just want Elaine. You smell all stinky like a mule." So we have all these like similar related points of smelling like a horse or a stable, mad for horses, being half horse. And then, of course, everyone's like, she's like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of you. You're the lady jouster." And like, yeah, jousting, it's so important for for horsemanship. And it's just like, hello, this is Night of the Laughing Tree vibes, isn't it? Joe, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, well, to keep with those vibes, I mean, she does literally say in this chapter that she wants to do some jousting, and maybe Lyanna did do that. I think that's exactly what she did do at that tournament. So that's another connection there. Elia, she's probably my favorite of the new characters we get across all these preview chapters, to be honest with you. I think she's pretty funny, first off, but she also provides a great opportunity for Arianne to feel older and feel changed, because she is older, so she gets to look look at the younger person, see that she's grown into a more strained, more serious Martell, rather than the other route, which is the kind of wilder sand snake. She actually gets to see that this time, which is a bit different to seeing it with someone your own age. Now you can see kind of where they went, the kind of split in the route there.
It's like, was I like that at that age? Oh,
yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And I say she's the older and more strained, but they actually all participate in the same horse race. So it's not like she's completely grown up. Just to give another Sansa parallel, that's pretty similar to Sansa and Miranda running for the gates as well.
Yes.
The only difference is Elia gets the W. She beats them. But yeah, like I say, it just allows her to see the format the Sand Snakes go through. Like they get to a certain age, they all kind of end up pretty much the same. Maybe Sorella's a bit different, but the other three definitely follow a blueprint, and she can see Elia kind of getting into that age right about now. So it just frames things a little bit differently, makes her think of her own role. She's not going to be able to do that. She's got different responsibilities. She's not a Sand Snake. However much she liked them, however much she really liked Oberyn, she's not one. She's got these other different roles. So that's another growing up, maturing moment like we were talking about earlier. I just think that's another marker off that sheet for this chapter. For Elia, I hope we get a lot more of her. I do wonder, maybe we'll even get to see her actually ride and joust. Maybe Aegon will throw a celebratory tourney and she'll ride in that. That'd be cool.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Any opportunity.
I agree with you 100%. She's my favorite of the new characters too, for all the reasons you said, and also the mystery surrounding her about, where this could go and the drama that could happen. But yeah, I just genuinely like her a lot.
Let me throw you guys a curveball based on that take. I like this idea. I hadn't thought about a tournament, but I had thought about what would fit in with the tournament of Harrenhal, which is that what if Aegon decides he likes Elia more than Arianne? Then we have a kind of a reversal of the tournament of Harrenhal where Rhaegar leaves Elia for Lyanna. Now we have maybe we'd have Aegon leaving Arianne for Elia. So it's like Elia is the opposite this time.
Do you think it's possible that Arianne would be okay with that because she, like, Aegon Young Griff is kind of a young boy to her?
I don't think so. If she sets her sight on him and wants to like kind of rule through him or row, then I don't think she would like that at all.
Well, I tell you, who's not having that. John Connington's not having that, is he?
That's
no
also
way.
True. That's also
no
true.
chance he's gonna. He will
bastard?
literally take swords. Yeah,
For the king?
No chance.
She is a bit more age appropriate for him, I will say, and
that's true. They are, they're like.
It's kind of interesting. She's
I do
14.
think yeah. I do think it is likely that we get a tournament. Like if he wins King's Landing early enough, like before Daenerys becomes a worry, or at least known to them as a worry, like that would be a thing to do, wouldn't it? Right, we've won, we're back. This would be a really good way to let everyone know that we're back and come and swear fealty, and we can kind of shore up our dealings, like what Peter Baelish is doing in the Vale.
Yes,
you hold this
having a
massive
tournament
thing.
Yeah,
They've not had a tourney for years now.
That would be so cool. It would line up.
We need one.
George loves to do those, like connect, like have a tournament here and a tournament here at the same time, kind of line them up and like have a culmination kind of thing like that. And that would be so fitting to have the Winged Knight tournament and then this tournament like shortly after or almost parallel. That would be something. What else do you think about Lady Lance? Let's throw it back to you, Emily. We've jumped forward on some of these theories, but let's pull it back and get us some takes from you.
Yeah, I've got a few things. I want to note something that Nina wrote actually about Elia being 14, same age as Lyanna at the tournament of Harrenhal, but it's also the same age that Arianne finds that letter and her life drastically changes. So this and Sansa is right around that age as well. So this just seems to keep coming up, and I wanted to call that out. Good call, yeah. I also noted later on in the chapter after the race, we see a bit of banter between Elia Sand and some of the other traveling companions, and some of the only dialogue that some of them have. But Arianne steps in to shut it down. It's kind of an interesting twist, pushing her from the one making the clever quips and being coy to the one doing the chiding. Throughout the chapter, we see Arianne and the others in the party grow increasingly vexed by Elia's insistence that she's Lady Lance. And this all culminates eventually in a pretty funny scene on the Peregrine, the ship that they're taking, in which Arianne's thinking, Arianne had heard enough. You might be a lance, but you are no lady. Go below and stay there until we reach land. Doesn't really sound like the Arianne from Feast. It's just kind of funny to me.
Yeah, it sounds like a mom, right? Like a righteous mom, like she's right there. Yeah.
I had to get the Mother's Day angle in here somehow.
So, fittingly, let's move away from Elia Sand with one last thought, and that is, and it's a thought that will nicely segue us into the next section, and that's, given that name, Elia is not exactly a name you would associate with, long life and prosperity. Maybe this character is quite doomed because she's been named for a character who was also very doomed. And especially if she's going to be associated with the character of Aegon the Sixth, who also seems rather not long for this world, and surviving the whole story maybe not likely. Yeah, he might, but it doesn't look great for him. And so the thing that will probably kill them, if anything, dragon fire is a not unlikely method of death for one or both of them. So let's talk about the dragon dreams of Tiora Tolland. Would you guys like to read this quote for us here?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'll start if you fancy. It was then that pasty, pudgy Tiora raised her eyes from the cream cakes on her plate. It is dragons.
Dragons? Said her mother. Tiora, don't be mad.
I'm not. They're coming.
How could you possibly know that? Her sister asked with a note of scorn in her voice. One of your little dreams?
Tiora gave a tiny nod, chin trembling. They were dancing in my dream, and everywhere the dragons danced, the people died.
That phrase is used a lot, not just dancing with dragons, the title of the Civil War and the book, but I pulled a selection of quotes here. Beans, the sellsword of the Windblown, told Quentin, then it'll be on to Marine to dance with the Dragon Queen. Barristan, referring to Quentin, he should have stayed a frog. Not all men are meant to dance with dragons. Dany, in Daznak's pit. Below, she saw men whirling, wreathed in flame, hands up in the air as if caught in the throes of some mad dance. The snail, of all people, in the Mystery Night. The snail may leave a trail of slime behind him, but a little slime will do a man no harm. Whilst if you dance with dragons, you must expect to burn. And remember, too, that it's true for dragons dancing with dragons as well. When dragons fight each other, it rarely goes well for either of them. Only when one of them is much bigger than the other. And even when that happens, well, after this, the storm broke and the dragons danced and died. So basically the lesson from these lines, these metaphors, is that it pretty much never goes well for anyone when the dragons dance, especially the ones who are against the dragons, the literal dragons. But in this case, the term is being interchanged with literal dragons and, dragon contenders for the throne. And that makes it a little bit confusing, but it all kind of points to the same thing, like doom, death, burning, and not good outcomes for these characters that are up against it. So that doesn't really bode well for Arianne or any of these people that are around her or Aegon. What do you think, Joe, about this take here in this part?
Yeah, we get some good old kind of Bran/Lewin vibes of the far-seeing child who makes outrageous claims that doesn't seem like they can be real, and all the adults say, no, like, you've had too many sweets, off you go to bed, and that kind of thing. But I love how many layers this can work on. You touched it there. This could be Aegon versus Dany. This could be physical dragon fights. Or the one that strikes hardest with me is, like you say, the fallout that the people will suffer, because that's very much the point, or one of the main points of the series, is the Game of Thrones and the effect it has on the small folk. Well, we've seen plenty of that, but I think the idea here is, if you think you've seen it bad, wait until there's dragons fighting, and then you're really going to see what suffering looks like.
It can always get worse. That's another theme we've pounded away on, haven't we?
Yeah. I think it links very well with the end of the chapter, when Arianne starts kind of questioning who Daenerys is and how she's showing us really again, like we said at the beginning, the question that everyone is going to have to answer is what do we think of Daenerys? Are we going to side with her? Is she mad, for lack of a better word, or however you want to frame it? And she's going to be given, because she's coming from behind, she's in second place, she's going to not be given the chance to say her side of the story. People will write her story for her first. Aegon will get here, and whether it's Tim or it's John Connington or whoever else, as soon as they're aware Daenerys is coming west, they're going to start saying things and saying, no, she's not real, or no, she killed her husband, or whatever it is. Yeah. We've seen that propaganda already all over Slavers Bay and, well, most of Essos already. That's only going to spread, and I think we're getting the first hints of that in this chapter. It's going to get much, much worse throughout the book. It's going to be really annoying to us because we know the truth, and we know that's not the deal, but the west of Westeros doesn't. So I think that really speaks to, this dance could be, I mean, we know how many different factors can go into it, of Dany wanting what is hers, what she's spent her whole life aiming towards. Someone's beaten her to it. She doesn't know whether he's real or not. I don't think that gets discussed enough. Someone probably at some point will plant the idea in her head that he's not real. So this could be a conflict on many, many different levels, and I think Arianne's just giving us the slightest hint of that. I think it's going to be a much, much bigger, much more wide-scale question that's going to come to everyone.
Yeah, and you make a good point too about we touch on it every once in a while about the lies people will tell about Daenerys. They'll be easy lies to tell because people will want to believe them because of they don't want to be ruled by a woman. They don't like the association with Dothraki and eunuchs and all that other stuff because they're xenophobic or what have you. But also, it will work really well for because they have the best in the business at doing that. Varys, right? Varys is backing Aegon, and Absolutely. Who is better at propaganda and understanding the power of it than him? And reverse propaganda. He's of course setting up Aegon to look perfect, so he can easily. Maybe not easily, but suspect that he'll do the opposite to Daenerys. Real quick, let's talk about how this is even possible. How is it possible that Tolland has dragon dreams? Well, first of all, let's take a note of how close they are. I've touched on this briefly before. Ghost Hill is only 3 days' ride from Sunspear, so there's proximity, and we've talked about how there's a vassal relationship there. We know that Daenerys Targaryen, not this Daenerys Targaryen, but the one associated with the Water Gardens, the one who married Oberyn Martell, had a lot of kids. Those kids didn't remarry up in the north. They remarried into Dorne, presumably. Very possibly one of, or multiples, married into House Tolland, which would be how this dragon blood, these dragon dreams were able to pass down into someone that on the surface doesn't seem connected to House Targaryen, but it's not a stretch at all to see how that bloodline could have come in. And we've seen this sort of distant bloodline picking up of dragon dreams. For example, a character that we mentioned earlier, Damon II, Blackfyre, had dragon dreams, and his Targaryen heritage would have been a few generations back. So we've seen that work. And that is very relevant here in this chapter because we get that moment where Lady Tolland's like, we've got the history books here if you want to read them. And she's like, nah. We're like, no, read the history books. You had a similar reaction, didn't you, Emily, to that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think all of us who love these books are such big readers that we were probably screaming and shaking our fists when we read that. I wanted to see the deep lore there. But I think it was probably included to kind of counterbalance all the progress we're seeing from Arianne here that we've talked about many times already today. She's growing and she sees herself differently now, but she's still the Arianne with very little intellectual curiosity and no interest in reading. Could you imagine Tyrion or Samwell or even Daenerys, who, has sought out more about her history, turning down the offer to see those books by comparison? Because I couldn't see that.
Yeah. Now, you also mention here this whole idea of taking the wrong side and how that is a problem. And that fits really well with the Tolland histories, because what we saw from the Tolland histories, we know from World of Ice and Fire and such, is that, and Fire and Blood, is that the Tollands were notable amongst a lot of Dornish houses for standing up to the Targaryens. So they have done this whole we don't have dragons, you do sort of fight before. So they might be a little more open to it than we readers think they should be. And I see you added a note here about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense with someone in this history to, I guess, can be a little bit more concerned about dragons and being like able to contextualize the threat of them a little bit more. The idea that Arianne is even considering, joining the side that doesn't have dragons seems a little odd to us, I think, especially knowing that Quentin is over there. But it shows how much that the years since the last dragons in Westeros have caused people to kind of forget their history, and perhaps history will repeat itself a little bit here. The inclusion just feels like a warning that the people of Westeros who are or are going to become aware of Dany's dragons might still underestimate them. It's really hard to conceptualize, what like an atom bomb is if you've never seen one or heard of one or had one exist in your lifetime before. And I think, the dragons are somewhat similar.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Nina makes note of the fact that House Tolland is one of the few houses that we know of, if not the only house, that has changed its sigil outright. We've seen modifications to a sigil before, but this is a complete change. They had a ghost sigil before. The castle is called Ghost Hill, but it's now a dragon biting its own tail in memory of a particular incident that the Tollands were able to trick Aegon himself by sending out a fool to duel him. And Aegon wasn't too happy about that. There's that pride again, right? He felt like he was being made mock of. And, well, Joe, you have a take on this. You're a little surprised that they have a sigil that mocks the dragons, huh? That is a little unusual.
Yeah, I'm just surprised it's been allowed to exist for like 300 years. I'm surprised like a Maegor or Aegon IV, especially being like super anti-Dornish, didn't be like, we can't have someone like literally mocking us on their sigil, because they are, as you say, they're citing like one of the major incidents of Targaryen incompetence, not only just that whole war of them like using guerrilla tactics and melting away, but this specific incident you're talking about of the fool dressed up in the armor. Like in my mind, it's like the cartoon where there's like two kids in a trench coat fighting Aegon, and he's like, I won. Oh, not really. So I'm just surprised it's been allowed to stay around that long.
You got me with that.
I think it is
so hard at that.
I think that's another to what I was saying earlier about Dorne being quite divided. Like there is anti-Targaryen or anti-dragon thoughts and feelings still going on here. Like the Tollands they're obedient bunch. Like Nymeria did delay Balon Swan, and she did drink the wine at the feast and dance, and she's helping Arianne out here. But that only goes so far. So that's something else for them to consider is, okay, maybe it is your nephew, but we still don't like Targaryens, and like we didn't ever want to get married into them and whatever else. This is a your family thing. So I think it's just another signal that you need to be watching the rest of the Dornish, because I think there is something kind of someone says that like they're simmering. I think Hotar must say that tensions are simmering at some point, something like that.
Yeah,
and they are. So yeah, I'm just interested, and I also want to know what the sigil was before. I think it's something to do with a ghost.
Yeah,
I want to know where the ghost come from. Is it just something to do with these white cliffs, or is it something more related to Jorah and her ability? Like, did one of them see ghosts back in the day or something like that?
What does a Westerosi ghost look like? Is it the same like white sheet, or is it a trench coat with two smaller ghosts inside it? No. I'm curious about that too. I wonder if we'll get some more history. Maybe Fire and Blood 2 will give us a little detail there. So this could be thought of. This invasion by Aegon the Sixth could be thought of as the Sixth Blackfyre Rebellion. And Nina writes how it has a lot in common with the fourth and fifth. There's some elements that remind us of that. In the fourth one, it was Damon the Third Blackfyre and the Golden Company landing on Massey's Hook, which is that bottom little tip that wraps around the Blackwater Bay, the southern point. And they didn't get very far. They didn't get a lot of local support. They were smashed by the armies led by Aegon V. That's Egg, of course, and Dunk was right there with him. Dunk himself slew Damon straight up. And the fifth Blackfyre Rebellion, the Golden Company had Maelys Blackfyre, and they took the Stepstones and were kind of working their way to Westeros. before Barristan and Selmy put an end to that with some help. But this time they skip the Stepstones, which is smart, and go for the Stormlands, which also maybe they don't have a lot of local support, but they have a much better opportunity to gain local support because this timing is just way better. The fourth Blackfyre Rebellion was timed when the realm was pretty stable. There had been some issues, but nothing like this. Nothing like the War of Five Kings that just happened. So it's a much better timing. And of course, that's partly thanks to Tyrion and convincing them that now is the right time, and partly because he's right. It is, the death of Tywin is a pretty big deal, and while Cersei's in charge, that's also a pretty big deal. So, yeah. But as we've said at the beginning, as we've been talking about all throughout, she's not really thinking about these other players in Westeros. She's mostly thinking about Quentin and Daenerys. Here is another quote. Would you guys like to read this?
Sure. Perhaps Daenerys realized that once her brother was crowned and wed to me, she would be doomed to spend the rest of her life sleeping in a tent and smelling like a horse. She is the Mad King's daughter, the princess said. How do we know?
We cannot know, Sir Damon said. We can only hope.
Now that's the actual last line of the chapter, and it's pretty powerful. As we've been saying throughout this chapter, it links back to Arianne's last chapter in A Feast for Crows, which is it's been a long time coming. In between that, we've had the Griffin Reborn chapter, which Nina writes, this is sort of a direct sequel to that chapter, if we're following the threads a bit. It's not told from Jon's perspective, obviously, but does follow up on the Aegon story. It tells us what's happening. It gives us more information about what they've been doing. And yeah, Joe, you have a lot of takes here on Quentin. Let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, I firstly like Nina's note there, like it being a direct sequel, which it is, and it speaks to what we said at the beginning about this chapter having the responsibility of merging the two storylines. Like, this is why Dawn was introduced in the first place. When George had that big expansion feast, and we got the Iron Islands, we got Dawn. This is what it's been leading to. Like, this point is where these things start to meet. This is why they're here. So it's really, really important. But I think Quentin and Daenerys, they actually kind of dance together more in this chapter, even more than they did in actual, like, in real life. Really, they work really well thematically. The ghost of Quentin, we've already seen, he's all over this chapter. He's a question that neither of the Martells really want to address, but he keeps coming up, but they really don't want to look at it too hard. Arianne, she knows that Doran is thinking about his son and where he is, but he won't say it. Maybe he's possibly thinking about what he's doing with his daughter at the same time, because if he thinks too much about what happened to Quentin, he might not send Arianne because there's too much risk going on. So she herself has similar struggles. She has to convince herself there's not any bad blood, and she does love him and all these things, but she also admits they don't quite have the bond you should. And like throughout, again, there's just these questions of where is he and why hasn't he shown up yet? And the obvious and ironically true answer is the one that they don't want to speak into reality. I'm not going to think that he might be dead, because then he might actually be dead. And with that links into the questions of Daenerys towards the end of the chapter that we just said. Has Aegon already defeated her? Has he got the jump on her? Is she not coming at all? And then that puts a whole new angle on the decisions that Doran and Arianne have to make. Like, you don't want to sign up with the non-dragon Targaryen if the free dragon Targaryen is coming around the corner and is pissed about it, because that goes against your whole thing of like, his whole thing is, we're not going to get into the game if we can't win. I don't want all these people to die. Well, if Dany really wants that chair back, then that's exactly what's going to happen. So you have to be sure which one you're gonna back. But at the same time, he doesn't know that Daenerys is coming. So this might be your one chance. This might be the only Targaryen that's coming. And you do have this emotional connection, or this familial connection, if he's real, that it is your nephew. So if you don't go, then everyone's going to be like, it's your nephew and you're not supporting him. All right, well, when we win the throne, we're coming back for you then. That is, like, there's so many different angles that they really have to dance on this knife edge. And so what's Doran going to do? Is he going to commit to the dragon without dragons, without this force multiplier of dragons to go, or is he going to go against his philosophy that he's been preaching for like 17 years again, don't play unless you think you're going to win. But Dany can just throw the whole board completely asunder. And that's without him yet knowing what happens to Quentin. I think we all know when he finds out, that's going to be a big turning point for Dorne, for the Martells, for Doran, and his approach specifically, and these choices he's going to make. Maybe he loses all restraints. He's like, right, I'm all in. We're going against Daenerys. I don't care how many dragons she's got. My son's been burned, whatever else. It depends how it's told to him, but we think it's probably not going to be told the correct way. So he probably is going to be, he's going to be thinking like that. He's definitely going to be looking at this mission they sent Arianne off on differently. He's probably going to be regretting that if he learns that Quentin's died. And yeah, it just comes down to both of them on a knife edge, and it's really just impossible to guess. They don't have enough information. Even when Arianne gets there, they're not going to have enough information because even Jon Connington and Aegon don't know what Daenerys is doing. Eventually, she will come and just change everything.
Yeah. And I want to refer to something Emily said before about how they can't even conceive of the dragons, like how they pertain to war, because it's been so long. And so in addition to Arianne sort of just like not considering a lot of the other players, she's not considering what the players' relative strengths are militarily. That's not like where her mind goes. And that's just not part of her calculus with whether she's just totally thinking about where she wants to be, how she wants, what outcome she wants, and not how dangerous it will be to be against Daenerys.
Yeah, to her credit, she probably hasn't gotten a ton of education on this, especially for so long. I'm thinking that Quentin would be, in that position. But
that's a good point.
I think I also keep thinking about the line that Aegon says, "I'm the only dragon you need," and like how laughably dumb that is when you consider that the very real, actual dragons. I kind of wonder if that line will come back up again and how it would be received by some of these characters.
You know who else said a line very similar to that is Daeron the First, the young dragon. They were like, we couldn't invade Dorne. We don't have dragons. He's like, I'm the dragon. So it's very, very similar line, very similar age. And that dude died young too. So, yeah.
It's interesting, like you say about them not being aware of like what dragons really mean. But over in Essos, like when Tyrion's going down the Royne and we're in that area, like it's hammered into us a lot, especially in Dance, that they do remember, even though it's way further back for them.
Good point.
Westeros has had them comparatively like yesterday compared to over there, and they seem to have forgot a lot more. So I think that's an interesting point you bring up, Aziz, and just how quickly they've forgotten, or how it's not quite sunk into them, or they've chosen to forget or whatever, and they're not nearly as prepared for what dragons can do. Whereas like Slaver's Bay and Roy, and they're like, oh no, we remember. We don't mess with them, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Dorne's track record has been a little bit better, and I don't think most of the Dornish have seen Harrenhal, which I think would make an impact.
Exactly. I was going to say Harrenhal is the one. Like some of the Dornish may have seen that, and that's actually an interesting question. I'm going to jump ahead to this. It's just one of the like random questions we have for the end. But I wonder why Doran, in thinking about his party of who he included in this group, I wonder why he didn't include someone that would have known Jon Connington, like someone older that would have actually had direct experience with the man. Because surely there's someone in Dorne that dealt with Jon Connington. But I guess that either didn't come up, or Doran didn't think it was important after all.
It could have been someone he didn't trust. Only people, like, he has to really trust someone.
He didn't have someone that he trusted. That's a good point. Yeah, it's entirely possible.
My mind went to the same place. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Well, let's move on here. We've got some other things that might be foreshadowing, and other things that we can talk about, general predictions for what we think is coming, other sort of situations that are clearly interesting, but more in terms of what they're setting up, not in terms of where we know they're going. First of all, we've covered the Dane stuff elsewhere. We've got a couple episodes on the history of House Dane and the Dane characters current, so I direct you to those for more specifics about the history and about Darkstar and all that. But in terms of what we can expect going forward, here's a very interesting quote, and I implore you all to consider the way George sometimes plays with gender when he's making semi-prophetic statements. Yeah, go ahead and read this quote, guys, please.
Sure. No man can stand against Hota. You're muted.
Now I'm not muted though, so I knew that. That was suspense building. I know what I was doing.
Well done.
I'll do it again, shall I? Is that what Darkstar is? A man? Said Damon grimaced. A man would not have done what he did to Princess Marcella. Sir Gerald is more a viper than your uncle ever was. Prince Oberyn could see that he was poison. He said so more than once. It's just a pity that he never got around to killing him.
Poison, thought Arianne. Yes. Pretty poison, though.
So no man can stand against Hota. I mean, I don't suspect like Obara is going to beat him in one-on-one combat, but poison is pretty much how he's dealt with in the show. So it's definitely possible. I mean, you're thinking about, yeah, who's going to beat Hota? Well, maybe that no one does. It's just like not directly anyway. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely this thought that Darkstar might turn the Sand Snakes to his side, and that would explain why Oberyn or Doran thinks he's so dangerous, and it would set up a lot that sort of lines up with where the TV show went. Now, the TV show is not a great basis for Dorne, so let's not go too far with that. But it's at least worth considering a little bit. Do you guys have any thoughts on this prediction or what you think might happen with Hota or Darkstar? Or is that just too hard to predict at this point? Start with you, Emily.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel concerned for Hota in this situation where, he's going to confront someone who, George has told us to be more concerned about Darkstar than I think we are. And I think Obara is such a wild card that it could easily go from being Obara and Hota versus Darkstar to all of a sudden Hota's on his own. I think poison's definitely an option, whether it be in a cup or on the end of a blade, we don't know, but it's definitely a little foreshadowing potential here.
Yeah, I think you're right as well to be, just to think about the character Hota is. He doesn't seem like the kind of character that's going to be developed for the long term. He's very observant, but like in terms of his own character, we know that hasn't been super developed. I still find him fascinating because that simplicity is a really interesting contrast to all the other POVs. It's like he's the clean slate, and that helps you, just shows you, like when you read a Hota chapter next to a Cersei chapter, it really just drives home how incredibly rich the Cersei chapters are. And while the Hota chapters are no slouch either, but there's just not very many of them. And yeah, anyway.
Sure. I think the more that I'm told that like no one could kill this person or that they're never going to die, like the more I'm like, okay, yeah, they are.
Yeah, they just set up that this guy's not beatable, so clearly he is. Right? Yeah. Same with the mountain, I guess.
Emily, I know you're more of the Lord of the Rings head than I am, but the no man can stand against him. That reminds me of, I don't even know the character's name, but the end of Return of the King, where she fights the Witch King. Is that? Yeah, sure, why not?
It's that's a hotly debated topic in the LOTOR fandom.
Oh, I don't know what controversy I started, but either way, it makes you think like he's being obvious. Oh, no man can kill him. Okay, so let's pick some women. Let's have Brienne kill him. I'd sell for that. That'd be cool. I mean, Gilly's not that far away. Give Gilly.
Yeah, give Gilly. Send little Sam to do it. He'll never see it coming. No. Little Aemon Steel song.
You know who's also not a man? A dragon.
That's for sure. Yeah, I mean, and then I love how this is just played with. Damon's like, is that what he is? A man? He's playing with this concept of like these titles and all that. So yeah, it really feels like George is getting sneaky here.
Well, Arianne calls him, but she names him his sin earlier in the chapter. So it's a really cool way of referring to him if he's just like just like this human form of sin. He's just, if he is one of the rare characters who's just like core rotten bad, and we've just got to deal with him going forward.
Yeah, that's true. All right, let's talk about these hidden armies in the passes here. Let's start off with you, Emily. You've got a lot written here, so let's let you run with it.
Sure. Maybe someone can read this quote for me when I get to it. But sure. I do want to mention, there's a lot of emphasis on the positioning of these armies in the Boneway and the Prince's Pass, but it's not that simple. It's not that clear cut. Arianne thinks this.
In the Boneway and the Prince's Pass, 2 Dornish hosts had massed. Yeah, that rhymes. And there they sat, sharpening their spears, polishing their armor, dicing, drinking, quarreling, their numbers dwindling by the day, waiting for the Prince of Dorne to loose them on the enemies of House Martell, waiting for the dragons, for fire and blood, For me, one word from Arianne and those armies would march, so long as that word was dragon. If instead the word she sent was war, Lord Ironwood and Lord Fowler and their armies would remain in place. The Prince of Dorne was nothing if not subtle. Here, war meant wait.
Real quick, wouldn't it have been easier to just not use the word dragon at all?
Like, actually, we got a question from Rolling that
okay.
was like, this seems dumb. This seems like unnecessarily sneaky, and it could easily go wrong.
Yeah.
So
I completely agree with that.
Yes, that's great. That leads right into what I'm thinking, actually.
Perfect.
So, Arianne's always known that her father, and to an extent, his bannermen, are patient and cautious enough to follow him anyway. She puts that understanding in a new context as a tactician here. But this is also just ambiguous enough that the use of the word dragon that could also fit for Aegon, though it's much more likely that we're talking about literal dragons here. It's just another way to frame this predicament that Dorne is in. Their cautious plan has been upset so many times. Some of those times they don't even know about yet. Maybe a few years ago, the choice between Viserys or Dany versus Aegon would have been much easier to make because of Aegon's clear acclaim and his blood ties to House Martell. But the wisdom of not entirely trusting Aegon to be real, coupled with the acknowledgement of the raw power, even if they underpower it, of an actual dragon or three, is interesting here. The passage that we just read also helps demonstrate that it's not just Doran being cautious. There are other major players in Dorne here that are cautious as well. Certainly enough to sit there and wait on his orders. We're seeing that as like a little bit more dovish than hawkish, I guess. Non-Dornish characterizations of Dorne and their people often tend to say things like fiery or snake-like or untrustworthy or hot-tempered, things that we've seen attributed mostly to Oberyn and his daughters. But it's nice to have this conversation that there are actually plenty of Dornishmen who align enough with Doran's caution that him staying in power all this time makes sense. And it also subtly undercuts some of the claims that the Sand Snakes made earlier in Feast, that Dorne is crying out for war. I have no doubt, like Joe said before, that Dorne isn't this monolith in terms of their political positions, but this speaks to the idea that Dorne still has some control and that his politics still rule the day here.
Yeah, you're right to point out that there's definitely a lot of people. As again, Hota's observancy really helps us there. He paid very close attention to who toasted the king, Tommen, and who turned over their glasses. And the ones who didn't drink and turned over their glasses, those are the ones that are the restless ones, the ones who were not part of this monolith behind Doran. So you're right. And then Darkstar might be the guy that triggers a lot of that. That might be what he's why Oberyn, or why Doran sees him as dangerous, is that could be the spark that unites or triggers that unhappy element.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. Like even geographically, like they're on opposite ends of Dorne. There's people far away out of Doran's control. I think these two armies being there is really, really interesting. Like in the quote, it says it's Lords Ironwood and Fowler. So you think if they do get activated and they do come up, the Dornish finally come out of Dorne, which doesn't happen very often historically. Like only at like major events this has happened before. So that on its own is a marker of the times if they start marching out. But if those two come up, then assumedly we'll get to meet them at some point, and especially in terms of I forget his first name now, but Lord Ironwood. That'd be really cool to get to meet him because he's got his own bad news to hear as well.
Oh yeah.
And like it's just, again, I keep coming back to it, but this wider scope of Dornish politics, like just in this chapter alone, think how many different surnames we've said that don't ever really come up, like Ironwood and Fowler. I can't even say it, like Illyrian, that's it. And Tolland, and we're just considering them more now than we ever have before because they might be really important. And like I said earlier, it's just they could all be together. They could be split on the Targaryens or whatever Doran chooses. It could go either way. But I think it is one of those things where you just wonder, is there actually time to cover all this? Because there's so much to cover. Yeah. But I'm hoping we at least get some of it and we at least get to meet some of these characters like an Ironwood or a Fowler, because it would be really interesting to see the Dornish politics at work.
Now, there's no indication in the final chapter in Kevin's epilogue that the Iron Throne faction, the Lannisters, the Tyrells, have any idea about these armies massed in the passes. So they seem to be concealed for the moment. But Varys may know, and he's a real interesting person to consider here, given we just talked about how this password business is real sketchy. Maybe Varys could trigger something by sending a false message, or maybe he could, I don't know. It's hard to predict what Varys might do, but just consider his cleverness and in the midst of this situation, and your head might spin a little bit and what he might do. But it's not just these armies in the passes. There's also navies in the seas. These are a little less controlled directly by the situation, but they're certainly something that has to be considered. Would you like to read this quote here, Emily?
Sure. You are wise not to come by sea. Since the Redwind fleet passed through the Stepstones, those waters are crawling with strange sails, all the way north to the Straits of Tarth and Shipbreakers Bay. Mirman, Volantes, Lyseni, even reavers from the Iron Islands. Some have entered the Sea of Dorne to land men on the south shore of Cape Wrath. We found a good fast ship for you, as your father commanded. But even so, be careful.
So we don't have a lot to say about this because we've covered it elsewhere, but it's just important to note that this setup is happening here because there's obviously, yes, the Red Wine fleet is a big deal. It's headed for Old Town right now, and we know that's going to be, well, it's going to be interesting. We don't know exactly. And one of the things it relates to is this next quote. I'll just read this one. And krakens off the broken arm, pulling under crippled galleys, said Valyna. The blood draws them to the surface, our maester claims. That is a hugely important quote in terms of trying to decode what the heck Euron is doing with all the priests on prows and the potential to spill blood in the sea, and then maybe scarper off while the krakens come and take out the fleet of the Arbor. So... woo, that's all very interesting, and this is George just doing his parallel work. He sets up other chapters with this, but it's very related. I mean, these guys are by the sea; they know what's going on. We know who this Lord of the Waters character is. We've talked about that. It's almost certainly Oberyn. Do you guys have anything to add to the navies and the krakens, or is it just you think it's pretty well covered elsewhere? I would be curious to hear what you think.
I think it's just another indicator of like the merging. Westeros and Essos are merging more and more now. You're seeing the Lyseni, you're seeing even Volantines coming all the way over. That's only going to happen more, and it touches to what you said earlier, Aziz, about how Aegon's managed to come over with essentially Westerosi people, like half the Golden Company. They do have associated with them, but they're much more acceptable in general, whereas Daenerys is going to mainly come with like Dothraki and Unsullied and all these people that Westeros is probably not as eager to accept. So I think this is just another indicator that this is the new era that we're getting into, that this is just going to happen more and more. It is a war zone. It is busy. The main thing I take away from it, I just think Lord of the Waters is a rubbish name to give yourself. Like, he's settled on Torturer's Deep as well. You've got a cool cave you're manned up in, and you call yourself the Lord of the Waters. It sounds like a bladder problem.
Nice. And of course, one other big thing coming is reactions to Quentin's death. We briefly touched on Doran and what he might do, but y'all pointed out other people are going to react to this too, not just Arianne, but Lord Ironwood, who knew him very well because he was basically fostered there, and not to mention the members of his party that died, Cletus Ironwood and the rest. So this is a pretty big deal. Do you guys have any thoughts on how that might go, or is it just kind of a wait and see suggestion? Emily, we haven't heard from you in a minute. What do you think?
I think so much depends on how the information gets rolled out.
Yeah.
I can see so many different reactions based on, are we getting the facts, or are we getting some, rumor off of a ship that kind of heard something? I think the reaction, once more actual information is available, is certainly going to push Dorne into Aegon's arms a lot more than they maybe would otherwise choose to do. Arianne might make that decision for them, so it becomes irrelevant. We'll see. But I think we've got kind of two father figures for Quentin here, who are both going to have a really hard time with this. Of the there was this pact, and where's your honor, and you're supposed to rule us, but this was not an honorable choice that you made, and we didn't get a letter, you didn't even try to explain yourself. I just don't see it going well. I could see a lot of kind of parallels to Aegon the Conqueror having trouble with Dorne.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Okay, let's talk about some other parallels and themes, some sort of miscellaneous things that directly or indirectly relate to some of these other topics, sort of maybe not straightforwardly. Here's another quote. Would you read this one, please, Emily? Another Arianne quote.
War is coming, thought Arianne, and this time Dorne will not be spared. Doom and death are coming, Ellaria Sand had warned them before she took her own leave from Prince Doran. It is time for my little snakes to scatter, the better to survive the carnage.
Yeah, that's really interesting because Nina writes how this is similar to Rob's plan. Don't keep all your treasures in one purse. You only make it easier for those who would rob you. And it's also very much a contrast to the opposite of the pack survives. But the lone wolf dies, the pack survives. But that's a metaphor for winter. This is war, and this is exactly what you do. It is better to scatter during war to maybe make it more likely that someone survives. And it's also exactly what Osha decided was best for Bran and Rickon, to not be together. So this is very true, especially when you're an heir to a great house. Separating them makes a lot of sense. We saw in the Dance of the Dragons, young Aegon and Viserys were sent overseas. That didn't work out so well, but it was probably a good idea at the time. So this is very much a thing we've seen before. And it's also, but it's kind of sad, right? Because the families, you want them to stay together. And in a time like this, without technology, it's hard for them to reunite, even with their privileges of being noble born and all that. This is very much a moment for us to bring up Ellaria as well, because she's super important, and she's one of the few characters that bears the standard of peace, right? Like unashamedly and aggressively, almost as much as she can be, given that she doesn't have a lot of power. So what do you think about this show? I see you have a note or two about Ellaria and this little bit.
Yeah, well, like you say, Ellaria, I'm glad she gets some shine here, because she is always very wise. She's pretty much always on the money. We had that great, only a tiny little speech from her in Dance, but it was brilliant. It's one of my favorites. But it does, as you say, it really gets through to us how devastating this kind of thing can be. And she's thinking forward. She's thinking of this a lot earlier than most people, but others will probably start having a very similar choices to make and all those kind of things. It's hard for us to really relate to it. Like, normally you think danger, you gather people, you try and protect them, but because she knows war well, she knows exactly what's coming. Well, she's essentially convinced that she is going to lose children. So she's trying to minimize the hurt and play the odds. And I'd rather lose one in one place, like you said, very similar to what Rob was thinking. I'd rather lose one in one place than four altogether or whatever else. And it's just unimaginable to us. It's horrific. And again, it just re-cements the pressure that's on Arianne here to decide something that will hopefully avoid that. I know Arianne's not thinking of it literally in those terms, but that is the case.
Right on. Anything to add about Ellaria, Emily? Or any other related topics here?
Yeah, I just want to add some historical context. I was just reading the hardcore history book that just came out, The End is Always Near, and they make a good point in that book about how it's a really modern concept to just expect all your children to survive. So I think, her being cautious and being wise about this is actually a much more realistic in-world reaction. Someone in the chat, who was that? Dornish Dame had mentioned, Tyrion had wanted to separate Cersei's children in the run-up to the Blackwater, and Cersei freaks out about that. But I think Ellaria here is being much more cautious and wise and realistic to, the setting of the time where, there's a lot of death and childbirth and a lot of war, and, hopefully your children all survive, but losing one isn't the same level of devastation I think we feel in modern times.
Of course, as it turns out, Cersei was right, wasn't she? Maybe for the wrong reason, but didn't work out for Myrcella going to Dorne. Yeah. Nina also makes note of the group of 7 riders here. This is a sort of common number. We have the 7 who rode during the dance. We have Rhaegar and his 6 companions riding to meet Lyanna. Ned and his 6 companions riding to Doran to rescue her. And again here, this is sort of a, as Nina writes, a spiritual undoing of the Queenmaker plot, where she's trying to, unseat her own father. Now she's, instead of trying to crown a Baratheon queen, she's trying to help overthrow a Baratheon king and do all this other stuff. And instead of traveling to the Hellholt with her 6 companions then to crown Myrcella, now she's traveling them to meet Aegon. And Guilty Undertaker makes a note here that Doran sent 6 people with Quentin. It was Quentin and 5 companions. So that's why it didn't work. He needed that 7th person, clearly. So let's see. Also, one of the really overarching themes here is that's pervades this chapter, both in a direct manner and an indirect manner, is the information. We know Arianne is operating on false information. We know Doran is operating on false information, yet they're a big point here. The whole point of this mission is to learn more about what's happening, to clear up these falsehoods. And it's a big question of whether they will. There's this quote here. Joe, you read this quote. This is Doran speaking.
Yeah, sure. Send a raven whenever you have news, Prince Doran told her, but report only what you know to be true. We are lost in fog here, besieged by rumours, falsehoods, and travellers' tales. I dare not act until I know for a certainty what is happening.
Well, given that last line, he's never going to act, because he's never going to know for a certainty what's happening. But hey, that wouldn't be too strange for Doran, would it? Oh, burn. Oh, yeah, throwing shade at Doran. But yeah, so Joe, you have some notes here. What do you think about this?
Well, I like that he's hitting on it. You're right, that's a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. But I just like that he's recognizing the situation. In this type of society, it's always a problem. But the flurry of activity around Westeros at the moment is ridiculous right now. I think it's way, way past what we saw in the first 3 books. And that was a lot. Like, if you consider Robert's reign, in general, that was a pretty quiet time for over a decade. Not actually all that much happened. It was pretty stable for all its other faults. Then we had the first 3 books, and that seemed like a lot happened, a lot changed, which it did. But now we're going to get even more. We're going to see even more, I think. And it's just impossible. It would be impossible to keep up if everyone was telling the truth.
Yeah.
If there was no lying going on, that would be hard enough just because of the logistics of it. And this, I feel like as we're going through these preview chapters, I know everyone scraps and skulls. This is coming up every week, it seems like on different scales. You can talk about Tyrion and the Yonkish army and how their communication is messed up and it's just not going to work. You can talk about it in you said earlier about Peter Baelish cutting off communication, and you can say it in Theon and Stannis and not knowing what's going on at Winterfell, and no one knows about Jon yet, and all these other things. It's literally all over the place, and no one is ever going to catch up. We're going to be chasing information right until the end, and obviously after we even finish the books. And I just like that Doran is touching on that, and it serves for some delicious irony in telling Arianne to look for truths when she's walking into maybe the falsehood of the books in Aegon, maybe.
And also to add what you're saying too, it's not even if they get news of what's happening somewhere else, the situation is constantly changing. So news that reaches
it
them,
almost doesn't matter.
It's already old news by the time it gets there. So so he's just gonna have to act. He's just gonna have to act with incomplete information. Do you have anything to add to this, Emily?
No, I think you guys covered it well.
Cool. All right, let's move on then. We have this line: so a dead drunk leads this army? Perhaps this Jon Connington is the son of that one, or just some clever sellsword who has taken on a dead man's name. Well, it is Jon Connington, but of course they also suspect Aegon of being fake, and that's, they're probably right about that. I think all 3 of us probably would agree with that, Ashea as well. But we have similar comments, just as the Kevin epilogue gave us Tarly very suspiciously questioning the Golden Company and Aegon, and Jon Connington's if it really is him, downplay. And of course, Gonnington is not a drunk. He doesn't seem to. He is in fact aggressively anti-alcohol. If we're being honest here, he's like, I hate that. You're not drinking ever, Tyrion. You know, you had one drunken evening, and that's it for you. No more alcohol for you. I thought about the possibility of like Sandor, who's quote unquote dead. If he ever leads an army, he'd be another dead drunk. But I don't know if that's meant to be like a joke like that, or if it's just part of the whole deception going on here. But I wonder if there's any others like that are out there like that. Like someone's going to pretend.
Septim Mordain.
You've got kind of a dead and a drunk with Theros and Beric. Too.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. That's very true. So, Joe, you wrote some stuff here about inversions to the Starks here. That's some good stuff. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I didn't really know where else to put this in, but if it sticks out to me anyway, you've got inversions and comparisons actually to the Starks in this chapter. Firstly, right at the beginning, this kind of hit me. We know there's the idea of what happens to Starks who go south, and you can flip that around to Martell's going north or east in Quentin's case. So we've already had Elia, we've already had Oberyn, now we've had Quentin. Arianne is the latest, so there should be some worry. Should be some definitely worry on Doran's point. And I also think there's a lot of the sibling stuff going on. We've kind of touched on it here and there, but we get probably a better look than we have in any other chapter into the relationship between Arianne and Quentin, because Quentin never really thinks about Arianne, to be honest. He doesn't really give her that much thought, other than kind of like lumping her with the Sand Snakes of being like a bully if he comes back and he's failed. Other than that, he doesn't really think of it. But she does focus on it here about how they never formed a sibling bond because basically they were too busy being used as political coin by Doran. Like Quentin had to go off to pay for Oberyn's mistake with I forget the older Ironwood, whatever he was called,
Anders.
in that duel that Oberyn did. That's
Anders,
it. Yeah. And so he went off, and but they were doing what you would have to do as heirs and as older children of a liege lord. But Ned never really does that, or at least he hadn't to the point we got to with the Starks. He kept them close because of his trauma and because of the war and everything else. He wasn't sending any of them out to be fostered. No chance. Not after he lost his family before. He was keeping them as close as possible. Maybe that was the plan for the future. Maybe not. I mean, he would have had some difficult decisions, especially with Sansa and Arya. I think it would have been very, very difficult for him to ever send them out to go and marry some bannerman or anything like that. Obviously, that's not going to be an issue anymore. But that's just a very, very different thing of how the Martells and Starks were raised. And you mentioned the friendship groups. In fairness to the two, they may be different, Arianne and Quentin, but they're both super close with their friends. Like Arianne is really, really close to Silva and Garrett and Dre. Quentin is really, really close to Jairus and Archibald. And the Starks don't actually have that because they haven't actually gone out and made that many friends. They've been kept close by Ned because he doesn't want them going out. They do have some friends. Yeah, they got Theon. Great. And Clay. Clay was cool. We liked Clay.
And,
he was right.
And both Arianne and Sansa, they grew up, with a good female friend. Yeah, like you said, Jane. And Arianne was obviously, was closest to Tyene. They both had like a best friend.
That's true.
But they were lucky in that Jane
also
was there.
were friends with each other a little bit more, with the Martells scattered a bit more. They couldn't have those sibling relationships.
Yeah, Rob and John were very close. That's a good point, for example. And maybe Arya and Sansa weren't super close, but they all loved Bran. Everybody loved Bran. It's hard not to love Bran.
Everyone loves
he was like the uniter of the group, which I guess that's kind of fitting. Yeah. Okay, so let's we got a few questions to close things out and maybe some final thoughts. Dan Windsor sends a super chat, says Happy Mother's Day. Absolutely, yes. Happy Mother's Day. Thanks for that, Dan, and thanks to all the mothers out there for being moms. Yes, we certainly wouldn't be here without you. That's literally true. The Tissue Tug Bandit. Nice name, sir or madam. Can you shout out Bernie Gers? It's his birthday today. Well, sure. Happy name day, Bernie Gers. Hopefully I said that right. Hopefully you're having a great birthday weekend here on Mother's Day. The Dornish Dame says, Tell father I've gone to make him proud. Edmure says this, but it could equally apply to Quentin or Arianne and their intention to prove themselves worthy of the mission Doran entrusted them with. And others bring up Theon and the Lannister siblings. A lot of daddy issues, period. Yes, very true. Yes. Trying to please your father as a noble child in this world is fraught with, fraught with all sorts of problems and concerns. That's a great take, Dornish Dame. Joe or Emily, do you have anything to add to that? That's really good.
I think that's right on the money. As we say, that kind of applies almost to every family. It kind of comes back to Tyrion's dancing on the strings of those who came before you. Like there's always something to repay with each generation. You've got to, as you say, impress, especially depending on what kind of father you have. Like, in fairness, the Starks don't have that quite as much. They don't have it as like, I have to pay my father back, whereas like Quentin does. He literally can't go home unless he's successful, to the point where he thinks stealing a dragon is a better option than just going home and saying, no, sorry, I didn't do that. And well, we might well see the same thing with Arianne. Like she might have a chance to leave King's Landing or not get involved with Aegon or whatever else. And she might think, no, I'm the heir to Dorne, blah, blah, blah. I've got to do this, and makes a wrong choice. But yeah, I think that's a great point. It is all over the place, all over the series.
Yeah, I like this, Dornish Dame. Thank you for that. I think it's interesting because it doesn't matter how good the father is. You've got Theon and Balon, or Tywin and his kids, but you also have, Edmure and his father, or the Martells, who clearly have a much closer or slightly better relationship with their parent. I think it's just something that is inherent to the human experience, but it tells us so much about the relationship and a lot about the kids and their interpretations of honor and duty to their family based on how they react to that prompt.
And very few characters have any sort of mother issues, despite their mothers being dead. We don't get a lot of that. Even though Malario, for example, like she wasn't around a bunch, she kind of took off. The main person I think of actually is Jon with Catelyn.
Ooh, yeah, even though it's not his actual mother. But
yeah, that he has the most like actual issues with a mother figure who is around and treats him poorly, and that he wants to live up to. I can't think of anyone else that really thinks about that a lot. Jamie thinks about Joanna a bit, like with the dream, but I wouldn't really call it similar.
That's a good point.
Give Robert Aaron some time.
Yeah.
That's funny that you bring up Jon and Catelyn, because I think that can also apply to Catelyn, that she had to kind of quickly fill like every role. Instead of just one role, she had to quite quickly grow up and be almost everything to Hoster, and that in turn affected Lysa and Edmure, because they were kind of shifted off their own paths a little bit, and then that obviously had repercussions later on.
That's true.
Yeah, and the power of these daddy issues is just magnified or multiplied by the having to live up to these history of these powerful, big, long-running houses. It's not just Tywin; it's Tywin Lannister, right? If Tywin was just some lower-ranking lord, this he wouldn't have that presence. He wouldn't have the power of this long history behind him that he's like, you have to uphold this, because it's not just about him, even though a lot of it is. He's able to make it about the house and say, look, the house is what's important. The house is what's important, and I'm the head of the house, so I blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's just such a great long-running topic. You guys mentioned Theon and Winterfell, but that was a parallel issue. Theon's trying to take Winterfell because of daddy issues, and Ramsay takes Winterfell because of daddy issues, right? Like that's the whole thing. Like, and they do it in the way of their people. Theon does it his sneaky, like raiding, clever boldness, Ironborn way that they're proud of, and Ramsay does it this sneaky Bolton way where it's just really underhanded and brutal and blames it on someone else. Yeah, just really, it's so well done. We could make that a whole topic. But
the whole time that's going on too, you have Bran's POV where he's thinking about, what would my father do? I have to, even though I'm, lost my home, how would I react? How can I be on, what's expected of me? And so there's even that layer.
Great point. Yeah, Brienne. Yeah, totally. Dornish Dame asked another really good question here with the Ilya Lyanna parallels. Yes, we're building on that. How much does Doran know about Lyanna, and how much will Elia Sand remind John Connington of Lyanna? That's something I just completely didn't think about, which is a pretty huge thing, because John Connington knows Lyanna. He was at the tournament. He knows probably more than a lot of people about what happened, even if he doesn't know exactly what happened. He would certainly have some thoughts on that. So that's a huge deal, and I'm not really sure how to answer that. I think he's going to be wary. He's going to be like what we talked about earlier. John Connington is like going to not like Arianne or Elia Sand's presence as they threaten to control Aegon, and he's not going to want that. So, yeah, adding this whole dimension to it of him having seen this happen before to the man he was in love with. He was in love with Rhaegar, and Lyanna, she runs it. He doesn't like Elia. His thoughts on Elia are kind of like she wasn't worthy of him, but he doesn't ever really think about Lyanna. So maybe that's coming. And do you guys have any thoughts on how that might take shape? It's a really good question.
Yeah, we didn't really get to talk about this, but in this sample chapter, we get to see the letter that Jon sends Doran, and it's very cleverly written in how it focuses on Elia, because he knows that's how it's going to get through to Doran. But as you say, we know that he didn't dislike her, but he certainly wasn't fond of her. If anything, he was just jealous of her. But this is really, 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 very interesting what you bring up here about. So he clearly thinks that the choice to go for Lyanna is what led to Rhaegar's downfall. So he's not going to let Aegon repeat that mistake. Do not let your eyes wander. You're supposed to be who I set you up with. So whether he places Arianne in that role, in that Lyanna role, I mean, or Elia Sand or someone else, because like they're not going to be short of people trying to get Aegon this way. It can be a Marjorie. It could be anyone. Like every family is going to try and make their move on Aegon, especially if they think they can get behind John Connington. And Jon is going to be very, very much like, no, don't take your eyes off the prize. It's almost like that meme of the guy turning around. Like, don't do that because you'll end up like your dad.
Distracted boyfriend meme.
Yeah.
Someone make that meme quickly. Someone will do it for us.
Nice.
That's great. Yeah, I think, it'll be interesting to see if John Connington hears about Robb and Robb's downfall, because that would be a great way to teach Aegon the lesson of like, it's actually important for you to marry the person you're supposed to marry. Do you want to get red wedding?
Wow, great point. Yeah, wow. Recent example.
Yeah,
really backfired. Yeah.
I also was thinking too, I think, the Elia and Lyanna parallels, I feel like, he didn't like Elia because of a pretty clear reason that I don't think applies to Aegon's match, True. There's no hint of any romance between fake father and fake son here.
Thankfully.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's going to be as worried about, being jealous of who he ends up with. But I think that, in his thoughts about Elia, he makes clear he doesn't think that he's worthy and that she, isn't a good partner for him. And I think that that's what he, if he cares about anything beyond just trying to keep the Daenerys dream alive, that's what he's going to be looking for. Is who has these qualities that will actually complement him, that will also maybe keep him from straying and making those mistakes. So who that ends up being, we'll see.
It's interesting you bring up jealousy there, because I think that will be quite a big factor. Not romantic jealousy, perhaps, but like Aegon is his one thing. That's all. Literally, that's all he's living for. He knows he's on a time limit. That's all that's left of Rhaegar. He thinks that's all that he's done for the last couple of years. So he's not going to be in a rush, even if he knows politically it makes sense. He's still not going to be in a rush to give away Aegon's time, Aegon's attention, Aegon's dependence on him. I think that is going to be a bit of a balancing act for Jon throughout, of when to lengthen the leash, so to speak, and let Aegon go out and make these connections and be the king, as opposed to his son. He's not going to want to give up the time and the access to his son, because, again, like I say, that's literally all he has, and it's all he has of Rhaegar as well.
And somewhere in all this, grayscale fits in, and I don't know how, but damn, am I curious. Like, how does that fit into this whole scenario? Like, what the? Talk about a wild card. Oof. Mr. Connington Stonehand here. The Stone Griffin. What is his deal? Shout out to Joe Magician. Joe Magician channel just did a stream on what caused the doom yesterday, and Joe is excellent on a variety of topics across the Song of Ice and Fire landscape, and he mentions what he thinks is the most likely scenario It's like a reverse of Olenna Redwine, where he thinks Arianne will get promised to Connington but seduces Aegon instead. That's pretty similar to where we fall.
I bet him against that.
I'm sorry?
I bet him against that.
Okay.
Just now in the chat earlier, I said I do not think that will happen.
Well, I think I agree with you. I don't know about the promise to Connington, but the seduces Aegon instead part.
Yeah. I said I bet $50 against Joe that I do not think Arianne will entertain the idea of Connington marrying her.
Okay.
Eventually we agreed that it's possible that it is floated in Connington's chapter, but I don't think it'll go any further than like. Maybe this. Nah, that's never going to happen.
Well, we shall see. We shall see. Last to party says, I thought Hota had his own human heart and conflict. Duty to Doran versus love for Arianne. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. I wouldn't call it conflict. Maybe more like regret or disappointment. Maybe it doesn't quite rise to the
I think
conflict.
He had a conflict there. I think
he
did.
Some. Yeah.
I think he's kind of now he has less conflict. He's kind of chosen what he's doing.
And Arianne's kind of on Doran's side, so there's no...
Yeah, there isn't a choice. You're right, that they're just on the same side as well.
Okay,
so basically, it wasn't the death of anything.
Yeah,
they just fused.
For now, yeah. One more take from Dornish Dame, who's really nailing it with the questions here. This is really just a comment, not a question. It sounds like there haven't been this sort of dreams in recent Tollands. Yeah, that's a good point, because if Tiora was not... If there were others... Like Tiora, they might not be so dismissive of it. And he says it's kind of like the Stark kids, latent genetic magic coming back through in the current time period. Like, when was the last time there was a Stark skin changer? Well, we don't know, but it doesn't seem to have been in Ned's generation, or probably not Rickard's generation, maybe not even for quite a while before that. So it could have a little bit to do with the resurgence of magic. Might be why those dreams are popping up. Not because it's really happening. The dragons are returning to the world. That's sort of a Lovecraft trope, not a trope, but Lovecraft pattern is that when there's sensitive people in the world, that their dreams pick up these things when they're out there, but they're not going to dream of just anything when there's nothing out there to dream of, which fits in with the whole rise of magic, the comet and all that coming back. So any comments on that? I think it's a good take.
I was going to say earlier, I think you're right when you were deliberating how Tiora has these dreams, and you were saying about, you and Nina both were saying about the descendancy. I think that's right, but it would be cool if we one day found out it's actually like a touch of green sight or something, and that we actually have it at both ends of the continent instead of just the one. I don't think that is right, but I mean, we do have a little bit in the next chapter, like that we touch on the children of the forest just over the Sea of Dawn, so maybe there's something there. That would be cool. I'd just like to see it like stretch the whole length of Westeros.
I mean, to be fair, we do hear about Dornish magic, and they would be descended from them, and we just don't know anything about it except for it being, water magic, etc. We don't know anything about it having anything to do with green dreams, anything like that, but it is possible.
Yeah.
Why not?
Mistman Jones jumps in with a question here, but that right before we're ending here, and it says, "Do you guys see the connection between Aegon and Jon Connington and Damon, Palehair, and Perkin the Flea during the Dance of the Dragons?" Oh yes, absolutely. I think there's also a lot of connections to Tommen there. I wonder how this is going to fit in, because Tommen has pale hair. He doesn't have the Lannister gold hair is listed multiple times as more pale for him. He has like pale gold, and since he's a fake heir, also Damon was a false claimant, and Tommen is in that regard too, and so is Aegon. So I see Gaiman as sort of a culmination of plot lines of both Aegon the Sixth and Tommen, and Gaiman's fate is to die of as a food taster, and we've talked about how poison could be in line here, and now Perkin the Flea, of course, kind of abandons his charge, which Jon Connington will not do, because this is the only thing he's living for. Perkin the Flea takes the black, which Jon Connington won't take the black. So, because of his limited lifespan and all that. But I've definitely thought about focusing on that parallel specifically in the past, and maybe just haven't gotten around to it. But yes, good catch, Mistman Jones. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Worth mentioning about, I don't know, a potential parallel between Perkin the Flea And John Connington is the Larry Clubfoot, Larry Strong connection there, where he claims that he was acting under the orders of Larry's, and whereas Connington would be acting under the orders of Varys.
That's true, yeah.
So,
Larys and Varys, obviously,
we often compare the two of them. So anyways, just that additionally, I suppose.
That's a good call, yeah.
I wouldn't rule out abandonment by John Connington, but it certainly wouldn't be by his choice. It would be something like the grayscale has progressed to a point that he has to sequester himself away.
And I think
and
we
also
talked
the possibility
about
that it messes with his brain. Like the stone men slowly go mad, and maybe he'll just go mad.
And we've also talked a bit about if Connington was faced with Jon Snow. And we ultimately don't think he will be, but if he was faced with that, that is a real conflict for him.
Maybe like, whoa, this is
weird.
We joked about, was he named for me? No.
That would be the big convincing part. But yeah, what would he choose? Like the kid that he had raised that's like a son to him, but that he's not sure if it's Rhaegar's son, or the kid that whatever we somehow have proof is Rhaegar's son because he's riding a dragon or something like that. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to come to that.
And that's another thing about Game and Pale here is he becomes convinced that he realizes that he was foisted as a false heir on the realm, even though he was a kid. It's possible that will happen with Aegon, and that Dany slays the lie of his parentage, and he's like, "Wow, I'm not Rhaegar's son." And then what does he do? Like, can he face that, or does he just? I don't know. I mean, that's why this could do this. That's why I kind of mixed Tommen up into all this, where it's not just about Aegon, but yeah, the parallels are really strong here. I'm glad Miss Man Jones brought that up. We'll probably be coming back to this when later when these themes and parallels become even more clear. But for now, we don't have a lot of information. One last reference point here. Nina points out that this might be a nod to Dune. She did not shed a tear. Arianne Martell was a princess of Dorne, and Dornishmen did not waste water lightly. That is one of the huge themes of Dune, the preciousness of water. They also don't cry, but Nina points out there was a moment where Paul mourns at a funeral and he cries, and this astonishes the Fremen, who have this hardcore don't waste water attitude, and it's a really powerful moment because he's wasting water, but it's symbolic of his loss and grief and how much he cares, which is a little bit of a parallel to Doran's standing at the beginning. It's going beyond as a display of emotion, with a little bit of physical suffering mixed in. Good catch, Nina, there. Well, that does it for today. Big thanks to our guests. You guys were awesome. So we sort of talked about what you guys have planned next, but maybe reiterate what your initial plans are. You're finishing off TWOW, right? And then going into Scraps and Screens. Is that right? Did I say that right?
Yeah, too much is the answer. We've bitten off far more than we can chew. It's a huge mistake. I blame myself entirely. I don't know what I've got Emily into here, but she will find out. So yeah, we've got Scraps and Scrolls continuing. Our version of Arianne will probably be out Tuesday or Thursday or pretty soon, like it normally is. That will keep rolling along beside yourselves. At the same time, we do have these episodes of 100 questions. The second one will be around pretty soon. The first one's already out. Then we've got Scraps and Screens as well, which Emily's going to help out with. And we've done some fun extra stuff just to welcome Emily to our. We've done some Sporkle quizzes. We've had a little interview with her. That'll be appearing. So there's just stuff everywhere, isn't there, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. And we, our question list is growing, but we're not quite to 100. So if people have questions about the Winds of Winter they want answered, tweet them at us, get on our Patreon, whatever. We will do our best to answer.
Right on.
And give us your own answers as well. Yeah.
Well, obviously y'all have heard us work with Joe plenty of times, but this was our first time working with Emily, and I would say it went really well. Emily, you had some great points. You caught a lot of parallels that we missed, and just in general, it was a pleasure doing this episode with all of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm sure we'll get to do it again sometime. We work closely with Isle of Faces, so this will certainly not be the last time. I'm looking forward to, now that it's a different setup for y'all. Yeah, we like having additional voices. Speaking of voices, please submit your voice takes. We've been getting some good steady, but maybe not enough voice recordings from y'all for the chapters. We will keep at it. We will keep reminding folks. Mercy is very close to done. By the time a lot of you hear this, it may already be out. And we're working on Tyrion 2 next.
And I specifically, right now, need a brown Ben Plum, a Casporio, and... Geez, now I can't remember. That's the worst. Anyways, I need 3 more voices. Jorah. I need Jorah. So if you have a really good Jorah voice or, your take on it, if you have submitted, I do go through all of the submissions, but sometimes you might want to put on a voice for a character. So feel free to keep submitting. And yeah, exciting stuff. Especially women, please submit, because women apparently are less likely to submit their voices.
Yeah, we have more men listening.
Yeah, that's a good point as well.
But yeah, we need voices of all kinds. Please submit. You don't have to be a great voice actor. Voices are voices. We want them. What matters is that you have a decent recording and that it's somewhat distinct. It doesn't have to be. You don't think you have to have it. You don't have to think of yourself as having a great voice.
I mean, think about the example of Penny, for example. You want her voice to have a little unpolishedness, a little. Yeah, we don't want everyone to just sound like some perfect voice actor.
Yeah, if you think you have to have a great voice for this, you're wrong. You have to have a good microphone. That's more important. So let's hopefully a few more of you get involved, because it's a lot of fun, and these chapters will be out there forever, and it might be something we continue to build on. Maybe we'll do some more chapters here, and maybe we'll take a vote and say, hey, you guys, do this chapter, do that chapter. You never know. We did refer to a few of our other episodes and other podcast adventures with this one. Certainly the Blackfyre episodes are very relevant here. So are the House Dane histories, as well as the Aegon the Third John stuff. Yeah, there's just lots of...
It's because you talk about Game and Pale Hair. Yeah.
Yeah. Good call. And of course, the Isle of Faces podcast. Check out them as well. That is also mentioned. Next week, we have Arianne 2, fittingly. We're proceeding along the Arianne track. We have Minaro Geek TV and Scad from Davos Fingers as our guests. That's going to be a lot of fun.
The former we've never had on before.
We've never had either.
Oh, I thought we'd had Scad on for a stream at some point, but I guess not.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think we even had him on for Quiplash, did we?
Yeah, Quiplash, I think that might be it, though.
Yeah, anyways, we've been on panels with him. So
yes, we have worked together, just not in this setting, so that's going to be a lot of fun. Ditto with Minaro, who we haven't worked with at all, so that's going to be cool. We love getting new voices in here and try to highlight other members of the community and other shows and blogs and all that. So thanks, everybody. Thanks to people who came live and submitted questions. Really good questions today. You guys always do well with that. Really got us talking this time. And thanks to everyone who gathers at our various social media platforms, whether it's on Facebook. Thanks to our mods for doing their thing over there. We got Flick, we got Facebook, we got Slack and Discord. So lots of places to hang out and chat, not just about these chapters, but about other stuff. We're talking about different TV shows. We talk about a lot of talk about the spin-offs these days on the Discord, especially. But we also talk about other series. Like I just finished reading Broken Earth, and I've been talking about that with people and talking about Wheel of Time, Lord of the Rings, things like that. Just fun stuff, Star Wars. Thanks to Ashea for running everything from behind the scenes here. She added some great takes today as well. That's not too uncommon.
Yeah, I liked how you said that a lot. I was about to point that out. She added some great takes today.
Yeah, a lot of times you're just so busy that you
the chat was actually a lot less active for an obvious reason, which is that it's Mother's Day here in the U.S.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, good thing to celebrate, but yeah, it does kind of make the chat a little slower. That's fine. That's very understandable. Definitely hope people are spending time with their moms. Thanks also to Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval for the intro music. Thanks to claradox.de and Kevin McLeod for the video intro and for the Valar Rereadis music. Thanks to our Bengineer, who is not only doing great work on the podcast episodes, but he is a big part of the audio project, chapter project for TWOW. Thank you very much to our patrons. You guys keep us running. You are the reason that we are here. We would have had to abandon this show long ago if not for the monthly support we get. It is vital. It is valuable. It is much appreciated. And if you'd like to join in to become a supporter, we offer you things like bonus episodes, script access, things like that. So go to patreon.com/History of Westeros and check out the level that is best for you. And we'll see you later. Also go to Here Be Dragons. They'll be starting at 6 o'clock, which as of now in live moment in the live world, it's about 20 minutes away. If you are hearing this, the podcast version after Here Be Dragons, YouTube is always there waiting for you to check their replays out. This time they're talking about great and terrible mothers in fiction. How fitting. I wonder if Cersei will come up. If not, maybe other ones will, but I'm sure they've picked a lot of great options and great characters to discuss. And that does it. Thanks again to our excellent guests from the Isle of Faces. And we will see you all next time. You know what to do, folks. Valar, Rereadis.